Hello, everyone. Thanks for giving us your time today. I'm Ian Hamilton in New York, joined by David Heaney from London, broadcasting this episode of VR Download today. It is March 26th, 2024, and I'm wearing a Quest 3. We're live on YouTube with audience interaction, and I'm on replay across every podcast platform. We're here to talk about the rise of virtual reality, and you can support our work directly with membership at UploadVR.com. David, what do we have today?
Yeah, so we're going to be talking about three sections today. We'll start with some meta news. Firstly, Quest 2's price being cut again, now down to just $200. We'll then talk about the new report just out on uploadvr.com covering the information, claiming that the partnership with Tencent to bring the upcoming cheaper version of Quest 3 is still on. Then we'll talk about the confirmation that Quest 3 has higher retention than previous Meta headsets and some future research, Meta's research on making headsets and glasses understand your room layout and furniture. We'll then talk about PlayStation VR 2 because it just got a firmware update that makes it present as a VR headset to PC GPUs. So, given what Sony recently said about PC support, that obviously hints at what path that might take. So, we'll explore what that might mean. And finally, we'll talk about Apple Vision Pro. We'll talk about WebXR getting support for Vision Pro's gaze and pinch input system. We'll talk about the news that Apple Vision Pro is coming to China later this year. We will talk about the release of ALVR, the open source tool that lets Vision Pro act as a wireless PC VR headset. And it even forwards hand tracking and Bluetooth input over to SteamVR, which makes PC VR games technically playable. And we'll talk about what exactly we mean when we say technically. Finally, we'll talk about some future stuff for visionOS. visionOS 2 is reportedly coming later this year, so we'll discuss what it might bring, including a major feature that we often talk about on this show that we can't wait to come to visionOS. And then we'll finish off by talking about the report that a new Apple Pencil stylus with Vision Pro support is being internally tested by Apple.
Thank you so much to our viewers tuning in across the world. A lot of regular viewers, and I'm noticing Nigel's comment there in the comments, very nice, saying a long-time listener, sort of watching out there silently. Thank you so much. Quentin, seeing member for 17 months. That comment just popped up right there. So a lot of long-time viewers, listeners, sort of saying that we are helping them keep the dream alive, I think, is what I'm seeing out there, right? Like I don't see it as a dream. It's fact. This is the future of technology, and the last 10 years of our work, of our obsession, is moving from belief into fact, is I think what that period was. So we appreciate all of our audience members out there who have been on this journey with us and are excited for these these news bombs to get dropped every couple weeks. Let's see Quentin's comment. Using my member chat to pour one out for the PSVR 2. What an absolute letdown of a system. The copium in the PSVR 2 community is real. Ooh, that is a heavy comment. David, any comments you want to respond to or talk about before we move into our topics today?
Yeah, we'll come back to that one when we're talking about PSVR 2, but I just want to echo what you're saying about this becoming a real industry now with the low and medium end with the Quest headsets and with the high end with Vision Pro. This is a real market with real practical technology now. And over time, we're going to see that low end and that high end start to converge together into the kind of products that tens of millions, then hundreds of millions, and then potentially eventually billions of people are going to use.
Yep, big times. All right. Are we ready to talk about this meta section here with lots of news? I'm very excited for, if you've been watching us week in and week out, you'll know we kind of build through the course of the episode to the big topics near the end. So we're going to get into some big discussion there at the end. But I've got instructions from our audience and I've got instructions from David to stay on topic. And the first topic here is a lot of meta stuff.
Yeah, I'd say this is pretty big news in itself. The Quest 2's price has been cut again, now to just $200. So Quest 2 originally launched more than 3 years ago for $300 for a 64 gigabyte model as the entry. It was then in 2021 brought up to 128 gigabytes. And when Quest 3 was launched, just a few weeks later, Meta cut that price down to $250. And now it's cut that price again down to just $200. And Walmart was actually running a deal where they also included $50 of Quest Store credit. So, assuming you were going to buy standalone games, or even if you were just going to buy virtual desktop, that means that the headset was effectively priced at $150 for standalone players, or if the only app you're going to buy was virtual desktop, then effectively you were getting it for $180. Now, Walmart has just run out of stock on that deal, but everyone else still has the headset for $200. The Meta.com, Amazon, other retailers. And this comes quite soon after the 256 gigabyte model, the higher storage model of Quest 2, disappeared off the market. It's out of stock at Meta. It's delisted at most retailers. And what we keep saying about this is, while this is an astonishing deal, especially that Walmart deal, while it still had stock, $150 for a VR headset that can access all of the Quest store minus one game right now, Townsman VR, with tracked controllers and hand tracking and all of the features that Quest 2 provides. That's an incredible deal. We have never seen that in VR, especially when it also accesses SteamVR via Steam Link or AirLink or Virtual Desktop, whatever your tool of choice is. But we still don't recommend it, and we'll soon talk about why exactly that is and why we think this price is happening in the first place. And it's the same answer.
Yeah, we've got a real smooth transition there to our next subjects, but I am seeing people in the comments referring to this issue that at $200, it is really hard to say no to a Quest 2. There's a lot of people that there's a lot of people sort of in your circle of friends or family that may have crossed a threshold there from it not being the right price for them or the right combination of stuff to, you hit $200 and it's like, oh, I've got three people on my list that I need to call up and tell about this. And at the same time, we all know what's very likely in the future. So it's a complicated thing, and I see it in our audience reflected. Do want to say, I want to put out another personal request. Please share the link out for this stream to other people, to new viewers, new people who might be getting into VR. We do aim to have the best information here, like the most accurate, verified information. And when we talk about speculation or the future, we try to clearly denote that for our viewers so they know when we're roaming from fact-based reporting to conjecture here. And we hope that's a very inviting place for new people. And one of the ways you can do that is by sharing the link out in public. Um, yeah, what do you want to get into on this subject before we move on to that second thing we've got under the meta header here?
I think we can move straight on because these are very related things. So we'll just explain why we don't recommend buying Quest 2 even at this crazy good price. And we do sometimes get some pushback on this, but I'm going to stand strong. I still do not recommend buying the Quest 2. And that's because we believe this is a clearance sale for what's coming next. And what's coming next is very likely based on a collection of sources and an internal leaked roadmap from Meta last year, is a cheaper version of Quest 3 to replace Quest 2. And this headset has been rumored to be named either Quest 3 Lite or Quest 3S. To me personally, it doesn't really matter what the exact name is. What matters is what it actually will be and what the price will say about what it is. And so again, what we know for almost certain is that a Meta roadmap was leaked to The Verge early last year that said that they plan to release a new headset in 2024, that's this year, after Quest 3, with the lowest price point that they can achieve. And what we've seen in reports from Bloomberg's Mark Gurman, who has been accurate about Quest and Apple Vision in the past, from the Wall Street Journal, which is a reputable organization, and from a Chinese analyst who has been accurate in the past about Quest Pro and Pico 4, is that this headset will have the updated XR2 Gen 2 chipset from Quest 3, but pair it with the old Fresnel lenses from Quest 2 to achieve a price point that can replace it. And we expect that price point will be somewhere around $300. So, yes, today you get the Quest 2 for $200, but quite soon, for just $100 more, you could be getting a chipset with a GPU, a graphics processing unit that is twice as powerful. In fact, more than twice as powerful at peak performance. And we don't know what kind of bundles Meta might do with this. Right now, last week, Meta said that they're extending the Asgard's Wrath 2 deal that includes it with every Quest 3. It's very possible that with this cheaper version of Quest 3, they could also include a game, which means that its actual value, it means that it's effectively priced less than 200. We also think, based on a leaked firmware finding and a statement from a Meta engineer about all headsets in the future having mixed reality, that this thing could have color pass-through mixed reality. So yes, it would be $100 more expensive, likely, but it would have more than twice the graphics power and access to color mixed reality.
Yeah, so the naming is an interesting thing that I'll just lead off with here, right? David making the comment, doesn't matter whether it's light or S, and as long as it kind of conveys the intent of the product. And I can't remember if it was in our comments or somewhere else, but someone pointed out the light naming wouldn't really work or would be a little confusing if this thing was actually heavier than the Quest 3 because it's using the Fresnel architecture. Now, I'll go a little bit further and like you could call it the 3C and then give them out in a whole bunch of colors. You could have a blue one, a purple one. You know, people have been begging for the color versions of the Quest line ever since they showed them off at that conference several years ago. It would be a interesting way visually to just differentiate the less expensive model and the middle model. The thing I threw at you, David, and we discussed it a little privately, but I'm going to air it out in public just to think about it. What would happen if you shipped something with like the Touch Plus controllers that are very inexpensive to produce with no ring trackers on them, and then you used the last gen XR2 chip with the Fresnel technology? So you basically abandon everything that's an advancement for the XR2 Gen 2, and you go for the throat at $200 with all this old technology. I throw this out as a possibility only because that would be a problem for Meta. Like Meta has the entire history of its or Facebook on has done incredible efforts to lower the price of all in VR. And it has almost been their brand, right? That they're not getting beaten on offering the best all in package at the lowest possible price. And I'm seeing people in our comments saying, you know, they should have actually bumped the Quest 3 down, this thing, and move a Quest 3S right at the top, right above it. It's an interesting idea. But it wouldn't help Meta do its larger strategy that we've seen it do in the past with Gear VR and Oculus Go. Remember, Gear VR was priced down to free at one point. They got it down to free. It's bundled with your device purchase. Uh, that's doing a 5S or sorry, a 3S right above this doesn't help them move the price down. Doing this combination of using the last gen's lenses with the new gen's processor does that. But all I'm saying is if someone comes in and undercuts them with an all-in package that's at the very low end of pricing, that would really hurt Meta. So it's interesting to see a Quest 2 being $200 right now. I almost wonder if it's preemptive.
Yeah, well, I think the Quest 2 on the used market is going to do that, right? Like anyone that comes in with an XR2 Gen 1 competitor, which I think is very unlikely, given that we're now in 2024, is going to be up against all the people selling their Quest 2 that are upgrading to either the Quest 3 or the Quest 3 Lite or another headset. But Meta has to really make a balancing act here about how do you prioritize pushing the technology forward, which actually makes it more appealing for people to buy, while also making it more affordable, which again makes it possible for people to buy it. I think with Gear VR and Go, Meta learned that it's possible to go too far in cutting out everything because Gear VR we know had poor retention. That was obviously its own issues with having to dock it in to your phone and drain your phone's battery. But with Go, look at what happened after Go. They they killed it pretty quickly after Quest arrived, even though the original Quest was at double the entry price, because Go just didn't have the hardware capabilities to play the kind of content that people wanted, right? You couldn't play Beat Saber, you couldn't play Job Simulator, you couldn't play Super Hot, you couldn't do the 6 degrees of freedom head and hands that really made VR magic. So what Meta will be wanting to do here with this new cheaper version of Quest 3, whatever it's called, is to get people onto the next generation of chipset. That's the whole point of the product. And when you do that, eventually you get to the day where developers can build around that. And then the graphical quality of games that we see will be better. And more people that currently don't want to buy standalone VR because they think the graphics suck will be able to jump in, right? Like, look at the two big games that just launched for Quest: Assassin's Creed Nexus and Asgard's Wrath 2. Those are Quest 2 games. Yes, they have a little bit of bumped refresh rate and graphical quality on Quest 3, but they were built around the XR2 Gen 1. We haven't seen what it looks like for a highly funded title to be built around the XR2 Gen 2. Of course we haven't. Quest 2 is only just released. The vast majority of Quest owners out there are still on Quest 2, but Meta has to eventually push the technology forward, right? And there's other advantages of the XR2 Gen 2. It looks like it has the extra NPU, the neural processing unit overhead, to do inside out body tracking, which means developers can start to build different kinds of experiences around that, where you block with your elbows included, for example. And we've seen like things where, for example, you can lean over a plank on a ship and have that actually correspond to your character. You can make shooters less janky by attaching the inventory onto your real chest instead of having it awkwardly, clunkily float off you. And then obviously you have the graphical quality that gets improved, as well as, of course, the fact that mixed reality can be implemented. And that doesn't have to be a mixed reality only game. It could be a game that incorporates parts of your real world and is mostly virtual. All of this requires pushing forward with more powerful hardware. And that's the point of this product. So it's a balancing act. And I think the used market is going to handle that with Quest 2.
Yeah, used market is a really interesting thing to bring up. I do, however, want to call out the comment from Derek here saying, I bet they'll call it the Quest 2S. I like that name, even though, uh, I mean, it's any of these ideas have problems, and that would be a problem for like just Meta's overall strategy of moving things forward. But it is a very good name, I think, to describe a product like that.
I don't think so. And this is why, because if what I suspect is right about this headset, and it does support color mixed reality. And one of the things we do know it will support is inside out body tracking, because Meta's developer documentation says Quest 3 and all future headsets for these downwards facing side cameras doing inside out body tracking. What it means is that the Quest 3 family, Quest 3 and whatever this headset's called, all are supported as the same target by developers, right? From the developer's perspective, it doesn't matter what lenses you're using to view the display. It's rendering at a certain resolution. It has a certain level of hardware capabilities, be that a controller that tracks in this volume, hand tracking that works this well, inside out body tracking, color mixed reality that can do, potentially room meshing, and a depth API that can give them occlusion. That's what matters to the developers. What Meta will likely be doing here is making it so that from a developer perspective, it doesn't matter which of these two headsets it's running on. And then from a support perspective and marketing, when you make a game that only runs on these headsets, you say it runs on the Quest 3 family.
So I want to go back before we move on to our next meta subject here, and I think our next meta subject will be sort of a short one as we move on to the last one. Um, but this idea that in our comments, someone mentioned Meta building the ladder, right? So Meta has a stair step system of kind of like good, better, best of getting into VR with their ecosystem. They've been building towards it for years, but there's been various kind of problems, right, with getting the old generation or getting like we stopped recommending Quest 2 last year specifically because of this dramatic difference in processor coming through. But what I want to like what we have to do is put this whole thing in context of just everyone else in the market failing to compete with what Meta is doing. And uh Valve found a way by doing a high-end PC-based headset. They went all $1,000 SteamVR tracking, and you get the best possible tracking for PC-based experiences with some combination of hand tracking with controller tracking. That's what Valve decided to do several years ago, and it did decently. Like it's leading the SteamVR hardware survey. They're not cutting out any of their profit to competitors, so they're or retailers, so they're keeping all of the money from the hardware that they're selling. They're building it themselves or assembling it in their own system. So, like to my eyes, uh, Valve is one of the only companies, if not the only company, to successfully compete in in this space. We're going to get to PSVR 2 here later in the show, but it is not looking great for how Sony has done in this space relative. And then Pico just had its, just got its butt handed to it by Meta in this last generation, both like regulatory reasons and just because how do you compete with how quickly Meta is pulling on great content for its platform, as well as cutting price and pushing out new like being the first to put in these new processors. If someone wants to compete with Meta at the low end, you either do it now or you go home and give it up to them for the rest of the market for like the next 15 years.
Yeah, it certainly seems like all of the competition we talk about coming in, and obviously Apple and Samsung and other potential companies entering are all on the high end. And I would say, has Valve competed with Meta? Yes, but in a very small subset of the market, the PC VR market, not the larger standalone market. And they haven't actually followed Index up with a successor. Index is it was high end when it launched, but it's no longer a high end headset. It's got Fresnel lenses and a 1.5K per eye LCD resolution. It's not, we're now in an era where we have, near 4K OLED micro displays and pancake lenses and inside out tracking and hand tracking and all of these things that the Index just doesn't provide. As Shalalaska in the comments pointing out, the Index is the same resolution as the Quest 1, though obviously the caveat to that is the Quest 1 was pentile, whereas Index is full RGB. But it would be very interesting to see Valve release an update here. They're obviously the company that is the dark horse potential here. We talk about Samsung, we talk about Apple, we talk about Meta. Valve certainly has the potential to do something, but as we talked about when Steam Link released, there isn't a massive incentive for Valve to do this when they can spend no hardware money and get everyone who buys a Quest to use the free Steam Link app to connect to their PC if they have one and spend money on Steam, and they get a 30% cut of each of those games. It's like Meta a long time ago stopped competing on the PC VR software side and just left that to Valve, and Valve is sitting there making money without having to release their own hardware.
Yeah, and so where that leaves us, let's go to Arlen's comment. So Arlen had a great comment on last week's show about AI, when we had our AI discussion. And if you go back and look at the after comments on last week's show, I believe I called out your comment because someone in those comments thought your comment was interesting. So I just wanted to point out that little circle of useful commentary from Arlen there. And then Arlen's comment here, I want Nintendo to enter VR and compete with Meta. I will take us off on a 30-minute journey of side conversation to get into that, but I think it's a very interesting idea, a very interesting comment, and actually partnering with 2D companies that are doing great with 2D flat content is the biggest opportunity, I think, for both Apple and Meta. But I don't want to derail us on that topic anymore now. Are there any comments you want to get into before we move on?
No, I just want to say that that's certainly an interesting thing. We did discuss it last week, and we'll certainly discuss it in the future, especially if it comes to some news, if we get some hint of that. I guess I'll just really briefly say my view on this is that I don't think Nintendo is the right company to release hardware, but I do think just like we saw Apple partner with Nintendo to make games for the iPhone, I think it's very likely that we could see either Meta or Apple or another company like this go to Nintendo and give them a couple of $1 billion, or sorry, a couple of $100 million, and say, go make some great mixed reality games for us using your game design expertise. Nintendo's expertise is not in releasing cutting edge hardware with, bleeding edge specs and power. It's in intelligent game design, and what they've achieved is in a culmination of decades of consoles, and we're still in the early days of VR hardware.
Yeah, I do wanna just tease out the end of our show when we get into the subjects, because I am going to save my commentary for then, to stay on subject here. So why don't we move on to talk about, this retention question, because I remember Meta sort of claiming that they had the data to show that mixed reality was, a useful feature for headsets, but they haven't really detailed exactly why they think that. What exactly is the latest data here?
Yeah, so there's still no specific details here, but the news here is simply that at GDC last week, Meta confirmed that Quest 3 owners have higher retention than previous Meta headsets. So a lot of discussion is given in this industry to unit sales, how many headsets are out there, how many headsets have been sold. What really matters to Meta and to developers is how many people are actually using their headsets, how many people have them actively being used, if you know, every weekend or once a month, versus have them in a shelf for months and months on end. And I think, I've gone on record in the past as saying I think the retention problem in VR is real, but overstated by some people. Some people pretend that the vast majority of headsets are sitting in closets, and that's not true. We know from some of the developers, for example, Rec Room has millions and millions of Quest owners playing every single month. Um, the only data we had on this in the past was that as of around a year ago, Meta had sold 20 million Quest headsets. And about 5 months before that, the Wall Street Journal reported that there were just over 6 million monthly active Quest headset owners. So, if you roll back that 20 million number back 5 months, you roughly get a retention rate of about 40%. So 40% of, at the time, Quest 2 and Quest 1 owners were actually using their headset every month. That's actually somewhat comparable to other consoles like PlayStations and Xboxes for what it's worth. But the news here is that Meta says that Quest 3 has a higher retention. The last time we heard about a comparative retention claim like this was back in 2019 when John Carmack said that the original Oculus Quest had higher retention than any previous headset. So it looks like that jump to standalone with track controllers and positional tracking had higher retention than Go, which had neither of those tracking capabilities, and of PCVR, because Carmack specifically did include the fact that the original Quest had higher retention than the Rift and Rift S. Now, fast forward these almost 5 years later, and Meta is coming out to say that this new version of Quest, Quest 3, has higher retention. So, yes, the retention issue is real, but over time it's getting better. The percentage of people who actually continue to use their headset is increasing with each jump forward in the hardware. And that means that it's not a fundamental aspect of headsets. It's a technology problem and a content problem. And as the technology gets better and the content gets better, people will return to their headsets more and more.
Mm, very nuanced run through there by David of the retention issues. I think the thing I want to add here is we didn't get any detail on exactly how this, like how, the scale of improvement or in what way. And historically speaking, and just, I don't know, the whole web at large, retention or engagement in eyeballs, like having eyeballs on your thing doesn't like isn't a way of rating how much someone enjoyed the thing. It doesn't like translate as to like how valuable or important it was in your life. And I always question or wonder that when Meta and Facebook in particular talks about engagement or analytics, they're always their own self-provided analytics and engagement. And you go over the history of the web, it's always about feeding more people into Meta's ecosystem for longer lengths of time so that they can get more money off of their users. And so when we start talking about retention and engagement, we're not getting that data. Are they actually retaining users more in Horizon Worlds? What's the retention of users buying games? Are people buying games at the same rate on Quest 3 that they did on Quest 2? So, like, the fact that they're vague here in their data doesn't give us a lot to grasp onto, and I wanna just contextualize that bit of discussion with what I talked about last week. People in our audience, myself included, I would be willing to pay 30 bucks for a premiere night ticket in VR to go see Dune Part 2 on an IMAX-sized screen in an Apple Vision Pro for a one-time only ticket to sit with a couple of my friends. That's ridiculous. That's absurd. I'm in a minority of people who would actually do that and spend that amount of money for that kind of content. However, there are people who will do it. The content is good enough to pay for that type of thing. And we are discussing over on the Meta ecosystem, is Meta making enough games to keep you in VR for 4 to 6 to 10 hours? There is ways of comparing how much content Meta has to keep you sucked in there for multiple hours. And as we start adding like other types of content, in addition to just pure VR worlds that you go and visit, there's other types of content that can keep you entertained in a VR headset for multiple hours. And I wonder whether Meta is always going to be home to, like, is Meta going to be home to all the best content of every type? Because I would like going back to our last discussion, Steam is home to some of the best VR content, and it is the only home to some of the best VR content. Now, the same is true on Meta for a few things, but most of the best stuff on Meta is available in other places. Uh, it's just this is we're talking about 2D movies, 3D movies, classic games, all that other content, and we don't know if Meta is going to really do the work there to be the best place for that sort of thing.
Yeah, I definitely agree that the lack of specifics here is definitely frustrating for developers. We don't know. What we do get, the one kind of, well, there's two things I'll say here. The one statistic we got that wasn't from Meta was almost 3 years ago now when that Rec Room statistic came out that there were 3 million monthly VR Rec Room players, specifically VR, and most of them are Quest 2. The second thing is, I watch the Quest Store's most played right now games ranking quite closely, right? This is a URL that shows you ranked in order what are the most concurrent people playing right now throughout the Quest platform. And it's usually VR chat, Rec Room, sometimes even Horizon Worlds up there, Gorilla Tag, Beat Saber, these kind of games, things like Population One. But what I've noticed since the Quest 3's launched is that YouTube VR is really, really jumping and is often either number one or in the top three or top five. And we have actually heard a comment from Mark Zuckerberg recently, a month or so ago, where he said that one of the things that people are using more in Quest 3 than any previous headset is the browser and apps like YouTube to watch video. So it does look like with a clear lens system, the pancake lenses, with that higher resolution, and with the color pass through as the background, people are starting to use 2D apps on Quest more. The problem is that there are far, far fewer of them on Quest than there are on Vision Pro. And as we've talked about many times in this show, Meta is going to really struggle there, especially if it's just depending on web apps. But again, not to go very heavily off topic, but we did discuss on this show before that the partnership with LG that Meta has now confirmed as a partnership may include bringing over the TV versions of many of these streaming platforms over to Quest. And I think that's when you'll start to see 2D app usage take off, with the massive caveat that you're very likely not going to get co-watching that way.
Mhm.
That's something that the visionOS platform is going to really have as a strength for quite a while.
Yeah, imagining the marketing what next year where over on the Apple ecosystem, you've got people sitting there on the couch with you, and on the Meta ecosystem, you're just sitting there alone on the couch. That would be pretty brutal if that's how it
Well,
arrives.
if those people can afford $3,500 versus,
Well, all right, so that's why I said next year, right? To assume maybe there's different competing hardware on the market. But Quentin's comment here is interesting. In my opinion, the best thing Meta could do is completely separate from the rest of Meta. So separate Quest from the rest of Meta. It'll never happen, but it will put a lot of people's concerns to bed. I'm going to strongly disagree with that statement, though I understand the underlying thinking. David and I were in quite the debate over this, over uh, Google, and Google doing this transition to Alphabet about a decade ago, um, and why that might have doomed the company, more or less, right? You at the same time that Google tried to turn into a conglomerate called Alphabet, where they are just assuming Google services are going to be needed by everyone, and so they like differentiated all their service to not compete with one another, so that each of these things could independently go off and be necessary for their individual uh, businesses. And then AI came along and made the need for Google web index search not as important and actually decreased the quality of Google searches more quickly than anyone expected. And right, where did VR go in that transition? It died. It died because it couldn't command a global marketplace overnight for this splintered organization. Um, and we're still waiting to figure out exactly who to label as the person who killed that effort inside Google. But that is what happened. They transitioned into a conglomerate and then killed VR. Uh, Probably because they were a conglomerate. So, that's the I get it, and it would make sense, but actually, you know, Zuckerberg, having his hands in all of Meta, in personally making a lot of these decisions, dog fooding himself on these products as much as he possibly can, is the thing that Meta is doing differently than everybody else to a certain degree, and you would lose that, like, who would you want to go and command that unit? Would it be Bosworth? Would it be Zuckerberg? Who goes off and commands the VR unit?
Yeah, I think the only way in which like Quest already is in its own division at Meta, right? It's called Reality Labs. Reality Labs used to be what they called the research division for a short time, but right now that means the division of Meta that makes Quest, that makes Ray-Ban Meta glasses, that makes Horizon and is working on the AR glasses, right? That is Reality Labs. So the only connection to the rest of Meta is through Bosworth, the CTO, and then Zuckerberg on top. So as Ian is saying, if you take away those people, you're then just answering to some shareholder appointed CEO in some other structure. What makes Meta really unique amongst these big tech companies is Mark Zuckerberg, right? And I don't mean that in any of his personal qualities. I mean the fact that he is not beholden to shareholders in the way that the other CEOs are. Mark Zuckerberg has a controlling stake of Meta. He has more than 50% or more than a majority of the controlling shares of the company. He can do essentially whatever he wants, right? Like, yes, there are mechanisms to take him out in a very complicated sense, but realistically, it can't happen. That is completely different from Tim Cook, who if he did something that enough shareholders didn't like, the board didn't like, they can kick him out really quite easily. Same thing with Google. Same thing with a lot of the other companies in this space. Valve, of course, is different in that they're a private company, so they are in their own way even more out of this kind of system of accountability. But if Zuckerberg had to go to his investors and convince them about VR back in 2014, I'm not sure we ever would have seen an acquisition of Oculus, and we definitely wouldn't have seen the tens of billions of dollars that have been invested to get Quest where it is today. So yes, Meta obviously has a disadvantages in owning Quest, but you're not going to see someone with a singular stubborn vision that has literally ignored shareholders essentially begging him to stop investing so much in AR and VR for the better part of a decade now.
Yeah, fantastic summary there, and I'm loving our commentary. I also feel bad for the commentary over there in the comments because I feel like I've set our commenters off on like a role play through the future that's not gonna happen over what would be their dream, setup for, structure over at Meta, and they're imagining Palmer Luckey, John Carmack coming back to run things. Um, the thing I wanna bring up, I wanna contextualize kind of the media narrative here compared with what we're trying to do and, like, what we understand to be here. Um it's this is a long-winded transition to the last subject in the meta section of our discussion today. I remember David and I had, when he first came on board at UploadVR, we had a long discussion about, whether anything Meta does with its research arm, it was Facebook at the time, actually makes its way into products. And that was like a recurring thing what we were discussing in those early days was what are these researchers doing? Are they actually putting any of their stuff into actual products? And I think what we've seen in this restructuring process over the last few years is Meta trying to accelerate that. Meta trying to figure out how do we fix this pipeline of hard research and get it straight into our products as quickly as possible. Um, and meanwhile, us as viewers, like, are watching all of this and trying to use these products and sort it all out. And people in our comments are like noticing like these overall trends of, just the public wants to crap on Meta. There's these people that are very vocal that just want to hate on this effort. Um, what I want to talk about is the media narratives, and I'm hoping like leadership at Apple or Meta are watching us so that they can understand it's the Meta has done like so Mark Zuckerberg can come into a room and we actually have this on the record with the Quest Pro and he can try out an early version of the Quest Pro headset and he's like, ship this without the facial interface. And in that interview, in my one time sort of talking to him, he said he made that personal decision of like, let's ship this open. Interesting idea. That's how they decided to ship that product. They kind of walked it back a little bit, right? They had the weird little facial interface that came, little light blockers, and you could get the separate full light blocker as a separate purchase. Uh, that's him personally making this decision and directing the flow there. What we have right now on the Apple side of things is one article from what was the name of the publication that finally got it? I can't remember. Uh, but one article that was granted access to speak to Tim Cook and tell the story of the creation of the Vision Pro.
Vanity Fair.
Vanity Fair. So it's Vanity Fair. I can't remember the name of that guy, but very, very big author, writer in the VR, in just technology space. M- Apple picked that writer to tell that story. And it may just be the first of multiple stories. If that author is smart, right? They could turn it into a book, and the book would be about Apple's effort to build the next generation of computing after iPhone. We've got a book about Oculus effort. Blake Harris wrote that book about the early days at Oculus, and then his access got shut down, and you see the product of that book. No one has gone inside and seen what it looks like inside Sony. Nobody's got the inside look at Valve. And these companies are all just quietly toiling away at the future. Um, this is all to say that that narrative in that Vanity Fair article that paints this picture, prior to that article coming out, the narrative out in public mindsets was Apple has no innovation. They don't do anything new. Tim Cook, all of the new ideas left Apple when Steve Jobs died. Like these are just the easy opinions that average everyday folks think about this mega corporation and its overall trend to the future. But what we know now is over the last year and a half, Tim Cook walked into a room and said, "Ship it" on the Vision Pro. And we know he walked into a room and said, "Don't ship it" to an Apple car, right? Those are the 2 bits of reporting. Those are the facts of like, he had to have personally made the decision to ship this VR headset. He had to personally make a decision to not ship a car. And like, before that narrative, before we know those facts, the narrative was out there that like Tim Cook is aloof. He's out of it. He's not paying attention. He comes by once in a while and checks on things and he's not really involved. Like it was all these negative comments because they were coming from anonymous people who probably left Apple and no longer cared for the work that they did there.
I still think those things
Uh
could be true. These aren't
it could
mutually
be.
exclusive.
No, it's all from these are all from individual perspectives, right? And when you have a company like this is why anonymous sourcing figures into things. This is why we try to push people to put their names to commentary. It's why we talk about Jerry Ellsworth a lot, right? Jerry Ellsworth is one of those people who worked at Valve and didn't sign the NDA agreement when they departed the company. So when Jerry Ellsworth makes commentary about what it was like to work at Valve before VR took off, we listen to it, and there's a very few number of people that give that named take on what it was like inside a company. And so this is just so I'm sorry for the long-winded sort of off-topic thing here, but I need to convey that the narratives about Meta and Apple are not accurate. And these are executives that are deeply invested in their organizations, their teams. They're trying to win the future of everything for the people that are on their team with them. And these narratives of just like they don't care, they're aloof. I don't buy any of that. So, Mark Zuckerberg made key decisions. Tim Cook made key decisions, and both of them are shipping VR headsets. And we should, if we care about VR and we want to see it as like the future of personal computing, there's some credit to give to that fact. Now, to give credit to that, right, David? Now we talk about what is the difference between the structure of these organizations. And to your point, David, like, is it true that Tim Cook wasn't involved enough to say no to eyesight? Like, if Tim Cook had been involved, could he have said, "Don't ship the stupid front-facing thing," right? Like, that's just not the right product. Or would that have been a miss, like the little face things were for the Quest Pro?
Yeah, I think regardless of exactly how it played out, what is very clear is that there are no companies that are investing in AR and VR at the scale of Apple and Meta. The scale at which Apple and Meta are investing is just orders of magnitude beyond what anyone else is doing. And, in case you think there's some sort of secret project, like you need to hire people for this, right? You can't in the modern world pull off a project like this without some level of job listings, without some whispers through the grapevines. If you look at a lot of the people that Apple and Meta hired in recent years, they are people that came from Google's Daydream team. There are people who came from Magic Leap. This talent doesn't come out of thin air. It had to be channeled by these two companies. Those are the two companies that by far, they also came from Microsoft in the cancellation of some of its bigger ambitions with HoloLens and Windows Mixed Reality. You get the bleeding of all of these companies that didn't believe in AR and VR enough straight into this channel of Apple and Meta. And that's where the vast majority of the industry's early talent and sort of developing talent has gone to in recent years, com- combined with and because of the enormous investment that Apple and Meta are putting into this technology.
Yeah, so, I mean, you can call out I will take the fanboy criticism, to heart, right? Like, I am very aware of that criticism. You can keep slinging it at me. I'm going to try to praise and critique and talk about the facts as I see them across the board. And Onakazi's comment, Cook is a logistics guy. It's not like he's part of the design team. And it looks like he takes the project lead's feedback seriously. I think that's what I'm getting at here. Like, there's a different approach to leadership or product management. And Zuckerberg is in there hands deep making those decisions personally, by all indications. Whereas it looks like over in the Apple thing side of things, he's leaving that to other people, but he's reserving a final like go no go for himself while still trusting in the process and the team. We don't know who's going to win. I don't know how it's going to play out. There's a lot of people in our comments that can't wait to see what Google is doing with Samsung. And I'm extremely excited to see what those products look like, right? Like, how are they going to get that together in the face of all this? So, yeah, this is all to say, like, let's talk about the actual structure of these organizations, how they differ. Let's get some insight into who's actually making these calls and stop like just praising the company that made you log into the phone you currently use.
Yeah, for sure. That's a very interesting discussion of Apple and Meta. Let's move on to the last piece of Meta news that we have here in our section before we move on to PlayStation VR 2. And then after that, our final section about Apple and Vision Pro. So we've talked about some of the near-term things with Meta, the Quest 2 price cut, the partnership with Tencent to bring a cheaper version of Quest 3 to China. Um, and did we actually discuss that? I Did we actually discuss the Tencent part of Quest 3 Lite?
No, I think we might have skipped that over that. Yeah,
Yeah, so
actually,
let's
that didn't make
quickly
our
cover
list.
that. I think we're going a little bit off topic here. Let's try to stay on topic for a while now.
Darn it,
We
David.
yeah, yeah. I mean, we're almost at an hour in. So yeah, the we talked about Quest 3 Lite or S or whatever it's going to be called, that cheaper version of Quest 3. I think we got a bit off topic on what we were trying to discuss, but the actual news here today is that the information's Wayne Ma, who has been accurate about Apple and Meta news in the past, is reporting that the partnership with Tencent to bring Quest 3 Lite or S or whatever it's called to China is still on. And I say still on because there was actually a report in January we discussed from a Chinese VR news source that claimed that it was suspended. Now, it's possible that that's true. Maybe it was suspended for 2 months. We know that there have been issues with this partnership formulating in the past. The Wall Street Journal had reported about how Mark Zuckerberg's past comments about China were making it a little bit difficult. China's officials that were looking into approving this partnership really didn't like some of the critical things Zuckerberg was saying from a political perspective. But this partnership has been in the broth and being made for multiple years now. And according to Wayne Ma, it is going to happen in the fourth quarter of this year. So around the end of this year, that Quest 3 Lite or Quest 3S or whatever it's going to be called should come to China as well. And that opens up an enormous new market for Meta. It could spell trouble or death for Pico, who we talked about before in a recent episode. Pico is working on a Pico 4S, but if you have a Quest 3 E or S or Lite or whatever it's called coming into China, that's going to spell trouble. We'll also talk later about how Apple is bringing Vision Pro to China later this year. So that could be an interesting competitor there, where you have this product from Meta that would be a fraction of the price, or truly somewhere around a tenth of the price, and offering a lot of the same features, but obviously with a much more limited hardware capability. So, I don't think we have any viewers right now from China, or if you are, please let us know. But I doubt we do. So we'll probably move on quite quickly to discuss that fourth piece of meta news, unless you have something to say on this, Ian.
Now let's move on to this last subject so we can get to the things that I'm going to make everyone roll their eyes about in the end of the show, because the experiments I've been doing in VR are going to have some haters, I think, when we get to that. So let's talk about this last meta subject before we move on.
Sure. So this is Meta research. We do cover Meta's research quite often in Upload VR, but we're always very careful to distinguish it from near-term arrivals in product features. So we have this tag on our website. You'll see future tech on top of any article that is about research. And that's just to be clear that, this isn't a software update coming to your Quest 3, but this research is about making the headsets and eventually glasses understand your furniture and room layout. So if you have a Quest 3, or even if you don't, you might know that it can do a 3D room mesh of your room, generate a 3D mesh of your room where you have all of the furniture and your walls incorporated in this 3D mesh. And it can determine where your walls are from that, because that's quite easy. It's really obvious for even a manually handcrafted algorithm to figure out what is a wall in terms of the boundary of your room. It can, from those walls, figure out where your floor is and your ceiling. But it doesn't do anything more precise than that, right? Yes, you have a 3D mesh of all your furniture in your room, but it doesn't know which parts of this mesh are a table, which parts are a sofa, which part is a chair, which part's a window. And that's a problem for developers because they can't build around that semantic understanding, right? So if you want to build a tabletop game and you want it to always be on top of the nearest table in the room, or the biggest table in the room, for example, you can't really do that automatically. You can try a handcrafted algorithm, but it's not going to always work very well. You might accidentally place the board on top of someone's sofa, or on top of something that is, a shelf that's not meant to be a table. What usually game developers do is have you manually mark where you want to place this. And that's a little bit of extra friction. It's a little bit less convenient. It also means you can't do things like automatically replace all the windows with a mixed reality element. So we talked about in the past the Aquarium update for Ocean Rift, which I highly recommend as a demo of mixed reality on Quest 3. If you have someone that wants to try mixed reality on your Quest 3 and you have one thing to show them, I think you should show them the Aquarium update, where it allows you to replace your windows with put these giant panels into an underwater aquarium. But what you have to do is manually mark that out, right? You point your controller and you draw the boundary of the window. If this technology, scene script, eventually comes to Quest 3, developers can do all of this automatically with one click. None of that manual setup. It also has the potential to make it much easier to, for example, turn your sofa into like a sandbagged position in a shooter because you don't have to guess, maybe you've accidentally put something that isn't actually comfortable to lean on. The system would be able to tell developers, this is a sofa, here's where it is, here's the bounding box that represents it. So really interesting potential use cases. Meta also points out that this could be incredibly useful for AI assistants, either on your headset or ideally on eventual AR glasses or even smart glasses, as long as they have cameras on them that can do positional tracking. Because you could do something like ask, how many buckets of paint would it take to paint all the walls in this room? Or you could be browsing an IKEA app and say, would that sofa fit over there? And then you can obviously see a position of it, but even just in one question, you can ask things like that. There's also commands. For example, you could say something like, place Demio on that big table over there. And Demio immediately appears on that table. So this kind of understanding of your furniture and room layout has potentials for headsets and for glasses with AI assistance.
Yeah, so this is a pretty key technology that just on the surface of it, you look at it and go, I wanted this yesterday. I wanted this functionality yesterday. It's a no-brainer addition to future design systems. My question of the thing that I think about with this is there's a parallel line of research over at Meta that is about automatically personally identifying information in the capture videos that you take with a device and blurring them out automatically. The reason, so you take that algorithm that blurs personal information, and you take this algorithm that basically figures out what the shape of the world is around you, what the objects in the world around you are. You've got two fundamental technologies that would change the future of personal computing. I with the camera glasses right now, there's a lot of people taking lots of videos with all those camera glasses from lots of companies. They're capturing a lot of personally identifying information from those videos in public that aren't necessary to capture. Like uh, all the devices have a white light on them, right? So the Meta Ray-Bans have a white light that lets other people know that you're recording. My question is, could that white light go away if the camera glasses could be assumed to be blurring everybody's faces and all the personally identifying information when you're out in public? I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think it's enough. It's a very creepy question to start asking about that light going away. But this is where I'm going with it. This algorithm is the beginning of us learning that machines need to see in order to help us with our day. So before that, it's been very, very uncomfortable. Like every camera on every Meta Quest device, going back to the original Oculus sensors, has been looked at with a lot of fear and concern about the idea that Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook are putting cameras inside your house. They shipped the Portal cameras with physical covers over the cameras to avoid that fact. This system is starting to prove you actually need computer vision aiding you for you to get the next level of functionality out of these devices.
Yeah, I think there is a really interesting question here of, as you say, does that light that indicates that the headset is using its cameras on Quest or actually capturing on the Ray-Ban glasses, does that need to be on if there's a computer vision task taking place that doesn't store imagery? Because this actually works remarkably, believe it or not, by just generating the same type of point cloud that's generated when you're doing positional tracking in a headset. This doesn't require imagery. You can actually just feed this specific algorithm with a bunch of 3D points in space that would represent this room, and it can come up with this bounding box. So it doesn't actually need to see The algorithm doesn't need to see. The headset does, because step one is obviously to use the imagery to generate that point cloud. But personally, from what I would like here is, I don't want to see a light in front of a headset if the headset isn't actually capturing video. I don't care if an algorithm running on my headset can see my room. I care if a person can see my room, or if there's a recording being made that a person in future could access, right? I don't understand. I think a lot of the things around privacy in these device designs are theater. Privacy theater is the term for it, right? Where there's all this idea of privacy as a word just meaning any personally identifiable data or any data about your environment is being used. It doesn't matter if it's used, it matters how it's used. I don't know why is there a light on my Quest when it's using the camera input to simply, process grayscale black and white imagery, generate a point cloud, figure out the headset's position in the room.
Mhm.
No,
I have an
that
answer.
those
You're right.
images aren't going to Meta. Those images aren't going to a person. They're not even being stored on the device. What matters is, when are images actually
S
being recorded and sent to anyone else?
Yeah, so what you're doing, so David just nailed it there. Why? Okay, the answer is because the average person doesn't know how to explain the difference between storage, processing, and recording information. The average person can't say what's actually going on here. So the light is giving a signal to anyone in the room. Oh, you're actually doing something with this data. What is happening? It's standing in for those explanations that average Joes can't give about what is it, what is happening. This is what's creating our dystopia. This is what's creating the fear and the confusion, and it goes to the point of like, what is this algorithm going to do? Is this a generational thing? Are the people that are in our comments, me, David, are we too old to be okay with this at a fundamental level, because we weren't taught in grade school what processing of computer generated imagery means? Like, there's this idea that, like, of yeah, personally identifying information, right? You can de-anonymize information that has been stripped of its personally identifying info, right? These are really hard concepts that are completely lost in every public education system that I know of. Like, there's no one doing the hard work of explaining, okay, this system can actually just, it can be offline, it doesn't need to be connected to the internet, it's just processing locally. The moment, like, we had this 2 weeks ago on our show, right, where people are like, "It's an always on internet connection required for the Meta ecosystem," and this guy over here has to write 1,000 words explaining, "No, it doesn't, it's not like that, it's way more nuanced." So, yeah, the light is standing in for a lot of just misunderstanding and people not getting this, but my question is, will we get there? Like, can they convince us, or do they have to, like, fundamentally go back to the drawing board on some of this stuff?
Yeah, certainly a lot to think about here. It just does get a lot more complicated when you do get into glasses form factor, because AR glasses of the kind we talk about coming in the later half of this decade and becoming an actual practical product in the 2030s are going to be using the imagery all the time, right? They're going to be processing imagery to understand your surroundings. And at that point, it actually means that the light becomes useless, because the light has to be always on. So if the light's always on, the person across from you can't tell, are you actually capturing a video, or is your headset just looking at shapes in the room to figure out,
Oh,
where its position is? And those things really matter. And that's what I
that's
mean by privacy theater. When the actual indicators become useless because they're being overused. It's something I hate about smartphones too. Like, when I download a
the
GPS
notifications.
navigator app, I get asked 3 times, do you want to give this your location? Do you want to give? Yes, I just downloaded a GPS navigator app. I want to give it my location. But, we killed this idea of pre-runtime permissions, where when you downloaded something from the store, you could see this app requires XYZ. Now everything has to be a nag. And what's happened now? If you look at how the average person interacts with those nags, they don't read them. They just hit allow, and we've actually got less privacy and security than before, because people have been so nagged about privacy and this made into a thing that is so different from what they actually care about, that they don't even read it at all, and they just hit accept,
Mm.
accept, accept.
Yeah, and it's interesting, we're coming from, obviously different experiences of computing, like, different different rollout of those nags in different spaces, different wording, different number of them, and it is an issue. But right, we're going back to the human centipede joke from South Park from a long time ago on why don't they read the terms and conditions. I'm going to say it's even deeper than like why don't they read the terms and conditions? Why don't they understand the fundamental processing of their personal information by the devices around them?
I never
Um,
thought I'd hear that South Park episode referenced on this show.
w- right, the human centipede, right? It's a very memorable one. Yeah, so I think we're ready to move on to PSVR 2 here pretty soon, but I think this is going to be a topic we're going to come back to a lot. Andrew Tech's comment, it's not just a lack of knowledge, it's a lack of trust. I think that's what we're describing here. David's talking about, both of those things, and I'm talking about both those things, and it's like a really complicated, complicated thing when you don't know where the lack of trust is, where how do you actually gain trust, right? I don't know. I don't think anyone has solved that there. And to date, your point about the lights, like I've seen multiple colors of lights, different strobing effects to signify different things. None of that does a whole lot of good. It's all confusing right now.
Yeah, I think the other thing I just want to say before we move on is what happened when this was applied to cookies through the European Union's regulation. I don't know if that is a thing in America, but if you're in any European country, every website you go to will ask if you want cookies. I would guarantee 99% of people have no idea what a cookie even is. There is no meaningful distinction to them between hitting yes or no, and they'll just hit yes to get the big giant prompt that's covering half of their screen out of the way.
Yeah, let's talk about PSVR 2 here. Yeah, lots to talk about on that previous subject. But yeah, PSVR 2's latest firmware update makes it present as a VR headset to PC GPUs. Uh, why am I not dancing on your grave yet, David?
So the key thing to say about this is that this does not mean that PSVR 2 now supports PC. The language here is very, very careful. So all this means is that as a display device, PlayStation VR 2 no longer presents as a monitor, and it now presents as a VR headset, as in it tells the PC, I am a VR headset. There is not yet an actual driver that you can go and download to use this on PC. You would need a driver to use this as a PC VR headset. What happened before this firmware update is that, as I said, it presented as a monitor. So you would see your monitor's view on a floating 2D screen in front of you, just as you do on PlayStation 5 when you're playing a traditional flat screen game or a media app on PS5 while wearing this headset. That's how PC support used to work. We'll talk about a major caveat there in a second, but the key is that there is no driver yet. Now, that doesn't mean a driver doesn't exist. The developer of the driver for the original PSVR, Ivory, actually has a driver developed and is being tested by a total of 1 users right now. There is one person out there in the world who has a PlayStation VR 2 on their PC that isn't the developer of a driver, and they're currently testing that. So once that's released, if you have an AMD graphics card, you should be able to plug your PSVR 2 in if it was a specific past generation of AMD graphics card that had the USB-C port. And that's the biggest caveat with PSVR 2's prospects on PC. Only one generation of graphics cards from each company had that USB-C port that can provide the required power and USB 3 data and display port to PlayStation VR 2. If you're not familiar, the end of the cable of this headset is just a single USB-C. If you are at your computer right now, go and look at your GPU and notice there is not a USB-C port unless you happen to have those few graphics cards. That means that there is an extra adapter needed. And thankfully, the way that Sony's architected this means that people who went out and bought virtual link adapters, which are priced anywhere between $150 and $300, can use that from this update to plug in to their graphics card. The problem is that those virtual link adapters are obviously, as I just said, $150 to $300, and they're also discontinued. So soon they will run out of stock at the few retailers that sell them. So that's the prospect of actually using PSVR 2 right now on PC if you are wanting to use that Ivory driver that's eventually coming out. Um, you will also, if you're on NVIDIA right now, according to Ivory, need a second adapter, a custom adapter that they have been working on that before this firmware update would have been needed for anyone, but is now no longer needed for AMD cards. So that's the barrier that's changed with this. But what this suggests, and the bigger potential news here, is that this strongly suggests that the PC support that Sony announced last month is going to come to PSVR 2 eventually will actually happen directly through your PC. The caveat being that they will need to make an adapter for the vast majority of GPUs. But this isn't a crazy idea, right? Sony could absolutely make an adapter. And we have recent in terms of a few years, evidence that Sony is willing to make adapters. To use PlayStation VR 1 on a PlayStation 5, you need an adapter, which Sony actually gives for free to anyone who asks for one. If you have a proof that you own a PS5 and a PSVR 1, you contact Sony and they will send you an adapter that allows you to plug in the PS4 camera to the PS5 and track it. So it's very possible here that what Sony plans to do is release an adapter that lets you use PSVR 2 directly on your PC. The only final thing I'll note here is that this is not confirmed yet. This firmware update strongly hints at it, but it's still possible that what Sony is planning is a streaming solution, something along the lines of Steam Link.
Yeah, lots of options, and I didn't want to speculate too many on kind of the ways in which the adapter might arrive, right? There's other things that they could kind of combine with an adapter that does this, but the adapter could change. What this thing does could change based on Sony's overall strategy, just in general. Um, yeah, I can't dance from the rooftops that I've been right here all along just yet. I'm wondering if uh, I want to wait on my big topic here, but the thing we've heard the rumor. No, I'll get into it because it's related to when we talk about ALVR. David, what do you think about the idea of of a place existing when you're not using a headset? How important is it that a place exists even when the headset is off?
What?
All right.
What's that
This
got
is
to
the
do with
way I
this?
think. This is how we're going to come around to this. All right. I want people to come to my home even if I'm not in a headset. I want people to drop things off in my house. That's how the mail works. That's how the real world works, right? You drop mail through a slot, you get the newspaper on your front doorstep. Uh how do you share spaces with other people? I
I
want
mean,
to
that's
think
called a
about whether
persistent game that's existed for decades. It's a game with
sure, yeah,
persistence.
Minecraft Minecraft charges money for you to have a realm that people can go into, a server. They have a server running for you to be able to log into and get into your shared space at the same time. You're right, it's existed for decades, but nobody has been able to successfully commercialize this idea of, except for Microsoft, of a subscription-based place that people can all go into at multiple times even when you're not there. I think about whether a PS5 could do that. Could a PS5 ever be that home device that just people could come into and visit even when you're not using the device?
I mean, as George Jorgensen's pointing out, that's already how VR chat works. Horizon Worlds,
Mhm.
Rec Room. On these platforms, you build your own world, and
Yes.
people can join in them anytime. It's called a multiplayer game that has persistence. It's not
Yep.
just Minecraft.
But
It's
it's run by the
the
platform. It's run by the platform and not by the individual. You're not running these home. You don't run a home that other people can come visit anytime.
people don't
You've
care
got
where
it
it
in
runs.
Rec Room.
To the
What?
user, they don't care if it runs in someone's cloud server or runs on their own
Mm.
PC. It doesn't. What does it change? You hit join and you're there.
Where I'm going with this, and it's gonna come it's I had to get into it now, is there's a lot of value in having a box in your house that creates virtual worlds that, other people can come into, that you can go into at any given time, and it runs as a separate process from the headset itself. You can go and do other things no matter what headset you're in, even though you're in there. I wonder I wonder what Sony's strategy going forward is. If they go and do this properly, bringing a PC, like getting PC support, how does that adjust to their whole ecosystem? Does Dreams survive? Is Dreams dead in the water completely, or is it going to live on inside this? How do you make games for Sony's ecosystem from here on out? And how do you connect with friends across multiple systems? Are you able to connect with the same set of friends with this headset when it's connected to a PC that you can when it's not? There's value in running the world separate from the headset, and I think and I wonder how it'll make more sense when I get into the ALVR section of this,
Yeah.
but I wonder how Sony exists in that ecosystem.
I mean, all of these things are app side questions, right? If you have, a game that runs on PlayStation 5 with PlayStation VR2 support that has private servers, you run that private server, you join it from any device. Minecraft's a perfect example. Now, it doesn't support PSVR 2, it does support PSVR 1, but this gaining PC support isn't changing that. It's all the PC is the computing device, right? This just becomes a new option for PC VR owners if it does get direct support. And
It
if it
it
does go through a
uh,
PlayStation 5, it just becomes, a more convoluted extra option that requires a PS5 as well. The only question here, I mean, this doesn't change anything fundamental about how games work or about how Sony works. This is just, can you plug this into your
you're
PC
right,
and
you're
use
right.
SteamVR?
Yes, and our commenters are going there. What the story I'm pointing out here is I don't see the end picture here for Sony, whereas I see the end picture here for other companies. I see where they're like trying to go, and it'll make sense. Let's get on to the ALVR because I
Well,
want to go
let's
back.
discuss this first. I mean,
All
I
right,
don't.
fine.
Your only comment was
I
to. I mean, I
Yeah,
just
go
think
ahead. I mean, like, what's it? I'm frustrated that this isn't working yet. When does this work for me, David? I want to see how this works. They've been teasing this for a year and a half,
when
by
Sony
my
later this
count.
year, Sony has said later this year they will release support for PC. So it's, this is setting
Fine.
the foundations in firmware. I don't think there always is a grand strategy from these companies. There isn't always, this is the next chess move that's going to make us win the VR AR race. Sometimes it's just, we're cutting our losses. I think that's what's happening with PSVR 2. I think they have failed to sell this at the rate they want. We've seen that report last week that production has to be paused because they just can't sell them enough. So if you have this piece of hardware, right, you've invested all this money into making it, you know that you could make an adapter and then sell it to a bunch of other people, PC owners, and start shifting that stock. At that point, it's just cutting your losses. I don't think this is part of any grand strategy at all by Sony. I think the plan here is just, we have a headset for a console. Not enough people are buying the headset. Let's make it a PC headset and clear out the stock, and then, be done with this for quite a long time until the market dynamics
Yeah,
completely and utterly change.
you're right. I think you nailed it, David. I think what I'm trying to like close the gap between is a lot in our audience. I can't remember who it was that was there echoing our fear at the like back at the start of Sony, right? Uh, Coming into this market, we even had Mark Zuckerberg on the record saying, "I don't think people are going to want the wire," and we've had this ongoing conversation with our audience of just how messy is this strategy, how failed is it, and I think David's got the right description there. My whole discussion about worlds and where they run will make sense as soon as we get to ALVR. All I was getting into that discussion is I don't. You're describing why Sony made this decision. I'm trying to describe why Sony may or may not be set up for the next generation of personal computing
I don't
beyond
think this
this.
ever
And you're
was a
right.
next generation of compute play. I think this was always just a value add to the PlayStation 5. It was just a reason that, you know, Sony Interactive Entertainment is not part of Sony Electronics. These are separate companies. This was just a reason for people to buy the PS5 over the Xbox Series X. It's interesting in our comments, we have some people that are saying things like, I regret buying PSVR 2, and others like we have JTM here saying, you guys are way too hard on PSVR 2. And then immediately after, we have TMS saying, not hard enough, IMO. Look, and I really do sympathize with people who are still kind of defending the PlayStation VR 2. I do think the comment we had at the start about that there's some degree of copium going on here is accurate. But at the same time, we do need to say when you're in a PSVR 2, right? When you're playing a game at higher graphical fidelity than anything on Quest could ever be, and you have, the lenses in the right spot adjusted to your eyes, you have those great controllers in your hands, you're really enjoying it, and you have those that true black with that incredible contrast that none of those washed out LCD headsets can ever touch. It can be a really great experience. And that's why it's so frustrating that Sony hasn't followed through with the level of investment, right? Like, we aren't saying this because we want to. I really want there to be a high-end console VR option that has a meaningful market presence that people can, essentially get the PC VR experience, but in a consoleized form factor without having to bother with the complexities of PCs that some people are just too busy and don't want to do. Some people just want to get home after a long day of work and turn on a console and everything works. They don't want to deal with the PC ecosystem. I respect both people that love the PC ecosystem and love all that configuration and playing around, and people that just want it to work with one button press. PSVR 2 is magic because it brings you that PC experience into that consoleized form factor. But the reality is here that like Sony has not announced any new first party games in a significant amount of time. They haven't announced any new AAA games. Quest got Assassin's Creed Nexus and Asgard's Wrath 2, and PSVR 2 got like what? They got Resident Evil 4 from Capcom, and I've said before, Capcom is holding up the entire platform essentially with bringing true full ports of their AAA titles over to PSVR 2. But Sony simply has not put the level of investment that it suggested to fans that it would. I really hope that changes. But what looks very clear, if you look at what they've done with the studio closures, if you look at what they've done with announcing this PC support, if you look at what has happened with them having to reportedly pause production, it looks like they are cutting their losses and they have just not succeeded here. I'm not going to go over the reasons why, but you can go back to last week's episode where I make clear that in my opinion the problem is the price. It's far too expensive for a console accessory, but we'll not go over that again.
So James saying, if I was being optimistic, I think Sony has a multi-generational perspective on PSVR. Um, where was the other one? People talking about Gran Turismo being a system seller, and I think that's a very valid perspective. Like that is a powerful game and a powerful brand. But wouldn't it get bigger if you had PCVR support for Gran Turismo? I think you would actually sell a bunch of PSVR 2s for PC use if Gran Turismo 7 ran in that situation. And I think I think it might help to sort of make this joke here. David and I, I appreciated he's pulling for these companies, and I think we are trying to be honest about our opinions when we share them, while also that's a bold strategy. Let's see if it works out for him, right? Like I think that's the kind of tone we're trying to hit with a lot of these efforts. I don't know if that's going to work, but well, let's see. Good luck. And I think that's been Sony's PSVR 2 story for us for a long time. There's incredible games, incredible content, but it's just not enough. Like it's just not keeping the doors open for a lot of people.
Yeah, the last comment I want to respond to here is from Steve Fractals saying VR2 had four AAAs in launch, Quest 3 had none, the promise of two, which came good. Um, uh, they're saying, why are we saying that then PSVR 2 is a failure, why Quest 3 is a success? Because you're forgetting one thing. Quest 3 runs every Quest 2 game. PlayStation VR 2 had no backwards compatibility, right? Any Quest 2 game you could run on Quest 3 on day one, and it automatically ran at higher resolution as well. And obviously, you get the advantages of the pancake lenses. PSVR 2 still doesn't have some of the biggest games of PSVR 1. This is the part I simply cannot forgive Sony for. The fact that they are going to actually support PC but not do a PSVR 1 backwards compatibility layer,
But
that's crazy. You can't play Minecraft on this. You can play it on the original. You can't play Skyrim VR on this. You can play it on the original. You can't play Star Wars Squadrons on this. You can play it on the original. That's the difference between Quest 3 and PSVR 2. Quest 3 had full backwards compatibility.
I had just had this thought or question while you were talking, while we've been getting into this. If Valve stopped selling the Index tomorrow and uh, started supporting this at the same time, would we recommend another PC headset, like there, it would we would instantaneously change our recommendations to go get a PSVR 2 or a Quest for these different reasons, right? Like you would go get a PSVR 2 for this or this reason, or you'd go get a Quest for this or this reason. We have trouble recommending the Index in 2024 because of the resolution problems, and it's just dated technology a little bit when you it doesn't have eye tracking either,
Yeah, and at the price.
and the price,
They're
yeah.
still they haven't cut it. They're still selling it for $1,000 with resolution from years and years ago. But to actually address what you're saying, yeah, if this comes out on PC and it is just an adapter that's either free or cheap, that makes this, either $550 or $600 versus the Quest 3's $500, this would be at the point where it does become a real change in the PC VR market because I wouldn't. I would say to some people go for Quest 3 and others go for PSVR 2. And if this does happen, we'll have an article saying, which one should you pick if you're a PC gamer? And it's going to matter what you prioritize, right? Because on the Quest 3, you're going to get wireless and you're going to get pancake lenses, while on the PSVR 2, you're going to get OLED and you're going to get the advantages of high dynamic range as well, most likely. So, and of course, the lack of compression, you're going to have a native signal going to an OLED display. Now, there are trade-offs in that we talked about that in our PSVR 2 technical analysis, which you can go back and read. But it will be one of the situations where we're no longer saying, look, if you want a headset and you don't want to spend four figures, go get a Quest 3. This will actually be an interesting. The market will actually now have choices for different preferences when it comes to PC that matter and aren't just for a tiny niche, like, big screen beyond. It's great if you are within that tiny niche of people who can spend $1,000 on a headset plus the tracking base stations, and you're the only person that wants to use it, etc., etc. You're fine with the narrow sweet spot of the lenses. You're okay with adding your own audio, etc., etc. It's a niche within a niche. This is a much wider appeal PC VR headset if it does work with an adapter without having a
Yeah.
PS5.
So what I've described is a win-win scenario for both Valve and Sony. They just need to work out the specifics. I think, like my let's move on to this Apple section. I think we've exhausted this, and I think it's time to get into the Apple section of this news, much to the annoyance of people that consider me a fanboy. Um, let's talk about WebXR first, David.
Yeah, so the WebXR story on Vision Pro has been a mixed at best until now. The problem is that a lot of WebXR content is designed around tracked controllers, and Vision Pro obviously does not have those tracked controllers, which means a lot of the time uh, you try to play a WebXR experience in Vision Pro, and it just kind of crashes or doesn't work at all. Obviously, more and more experiences now are starting to support hand tracking WebXR, and many of them do work on Vision Pro, but that's not the default input method of Vision Pro directly using your hands. The default is its gaze and pinch system, where you look with your eyes and then pinch with your fingers. And WebXR has not been able to support that until now. One of the reasons is that WebXR does not support eye tracking. And even if it did, Apple does not give developers access to eye tracking. More about that later, and some of that, how it applies to ALVR. But what it does instead is Apple gives developers basically a position of where you were looking when you clicked. Technically, it's actually a ray cast of coming from your finger to the position you were looking at, so that developers can intersect and find out what you were looking at. It's a very clever way to preserve privacy that means that developers never really get raw eye tracking data while still being able to use this gauge and pinch system. And the news here is that WebXR now supports that. It's called Transient Pointer. It is now part of the WebXR spec. Safari on Apple Vision Pro supports it, so developers can now build for it. Because it's part of that open spec, it should be integrated by other WebXR compliant browsers soon, meaning technically Meta could also support this on Quest Pro if they wanted to. Very doubtful if they will, given how few units that headset sold and their lack of focus on that recently. But it also means future headsets like Quest Pro 2 or whatever that ends up being called could support it. Samsung's headset with Google, which will likely have eye tracking. Any headset that has eye tracking and hand tracking and a WebXR supporting web browser can now use this system, and developers can write once and it will work everywhere. How great.
Very big deal for web developers to get that feature. I think this is a privacy preserving feature, right? This tries to protect the eye tracking data, so there may not be another path towards this running on a lot of websites. So I think we'll be looking to see Meta and Google and potentially other companies all support eye tracking in the long term, and we'll be curious to see if they have a similar approach. This next one, did we cover that earlier on the news? Did we end up covering that earlier in the news when we talked
We
about
hinted
China, or
at
was
it.
this separate? Okay.
Just like we reported earlier and talked about earlier that that cheaper version of Quest 3 is coming to China later this year. That's a report, not confirmed. This one is confirmed according to Reuters, which is citing Chinese state media. Tim Cook told people at a recent conference in China that Vision Pro is coming to China later this year. So right now, obviously, the Vision Pro is only available in the US. Apple has said that it will come to more countries later this year, but hasn't said anything in specific. And this, I guess, is one of those first countries. The first country. It doesn't mean it will be the next country the headset comes to. It could come to other countries first. We saw a report from Bloomberg's Mark Gurman last year. He's been very reliable about Apple Vision, saying that the UK and Canada will be the next countries. So it may be the UK and Canada this summer, and then China later in the fall. That's just speculation, to be clear.
Yeah, the way companies choose to do their business with China is going to be an ongoing theme for us. I am very excited, though, to talk about the next bit of news. Uh, why don't you summarize it, David, and go through everything here, and then I want to show my video and get into why I went off on that tangent earlier and why it matters.
Yeah, I can tell that this is definitely the one Ian wants to talk about because he tried this out in a very interesting way that we'll talk about very soon. But yeah, essentially, you can now use Apple Vision Pro as a SteamVR headset over Wi-Fi streaming in a similar way that you can use Quest headsets for this. It comes through the open source tool ALVR. You probably know about Virtual Desktop and AirLink and SteamLink. You may not know that there was an open source alternative available before any of these called ALVR. And in early February, it was ported to visionOS by a developer. And since then, another developer called Max Thomas has been putting in a huge amount of work to take that initial port from its rough state and to build out features and make it more reliable. And until a few days ago, you had to actually compile the source yourself with a Mac and Xcode and then push it to your headset. But a few days ago, it got approved on test flight. If you're not familiar with Apple's ecosystem, test flight is essentially the equivalent of Quest's App Lab. So you can go to a URL on your Vision Pro and download ALVR, and then you run a streamer app on your PC, and then you can now play SteamVR. Obviously, the major caveat here is you don't have tracked controllers on Vision Pro, but it does pass through the skeletal hand tracking into SteamVR's skeletal hand tracking system, which is actually built in to games like Half-Life Alyx. Now, if that was just the scenario here and that's all you had, you wouldn't really be able to play games in a practical way at all. They have added in ALVR some gestures that you can use to emulate controllers, but that's a pretty horrendous experience. I tried that out. I don't recommend that. It's a technical proof of concept. But what also gets passed through as well as hand tracking is Bluetooth input. So what people have been able to do, including Ian here, is pair Nintendo Switch Joy-Cons to the Vision Pro, hold them in your hand, and use their input to play Steam VR games like Walkabout Mini Golf, Half-Life Alyx, and Beat Saber. And so the key to understand here is that the Joy-Cons are not being tracked. All they're doing is providing input buttons, triggers, thumbsticks. What's happening is that your hands are being tracked and your hands happen to hold the Joy-Cons. Right now, you can see my hands are in a position that if I was holding Joy-Cons, my hands would still be tracked. And so Ian is going to tell you a little bit about how well this works and the fact that it even works at all.
All right. I'm enjoying the commentary on how you how you pronounce skeletal. Aluminum skeletal. Can you say those two words for me?
Aluminium, and I guess people are roasting me for saying skeletal. Maybe it's skeletal. I've heard that said before. I guess there are multiple pronunciations.
I love it. It's fantastic. All right. Yeah, I installed ALVR from test flight over the weekend. I went over to GitHub and figured out what I needed to install over there to get the streaming version over on my PC. And then I booted up into a wide assortment of SteamVR content. And I I resisted at first. I wanted to get it up and running. I'm like, oh, that works. I'm in Half-Life Alex. David mentioned something about Joy-Cons potentially working. Let's go get them connected. So I disconnected my preferred gamepad, forgot the Bluetooth connection, and then I went and connected each Joy-Con separately to the Vision Pro. Uh, and then I went into Half-Life Alex, and from launch, played through to her getting the gravity gloves, just start to stop like that. It worked, right? Like I went through this whole process. Um, and I'm seeing people teasing me about bingo, and the things we talk about, on this show, and I'm appreciative of the fanboy comments. Let me give you a comment from Andrew Eich, is that how you pronounce his last name? The CEO of Alchemy Labs. So Alchemy Labs is, of course, the developer of Job Simulator, uh one of the cornerstones of modern VR gaming. And then, of course, Alchemy Labs is owned by Google. They got purchased by Google several years ago. So here's the comment from Andrew, the CEO over there. We still believe the future for spatial is hand tracking. That will be the way the majority of users interact with the medium as it moves into the mainstream. There is space for controllers in that future as peripherals. There are tons of people who hook game controllers to their phones and love the experience, but the baseline interaction will always be touch first. Imagine a world where you aren't forced to use a single manufacturer's controller and can use a variety of input devices. That's a world we'd rather be in. Forcing controllers on every player limits our imagination and the medium. That's Google. That's a comment from Alchemy Labs, Job Simulator, and that's not me speaking. That's a comment given to me by Google, or someone at Google. And it's speaking to the fact that I grabbed a pair of Joy-Cons and I went through Half-Life Alyx, I went through Beat Saber, I went through Walkabout Mini Golf in the most unsupported fashion imaginable, and it worked. It worked worse than the Windows Mixed. Yeah, we'll get to the caveats here in a minute.
I was going to say, how well does it work?
Yeah,
Tell everyone
right.
how well it worked.
All right. Well, here's where I want to go with this discussion. I want to first talk about my world thing. I want to talk about why I explained
Why don't
the
you
the
just explain
world
how
model.
well it worked first, and then you can
All
go
right.
on
It
the
was
tangent.
how do I frame this? I couldn't use the gravity gloves. So let's just start there, right? Gravity gloves. These controllers do not pass over. So the way this is set up right now, there's no acceleration data that's passed from this whole system to the game. So when you try to yank stuff over to you with the gravity gloves, or you try to toss an object, the object just falls straight to the ground. So most of the game you can't play. But the first part of the game, from the opening section to getting the gravity gloves, you can get through there and you can do a few things. And I picked a later map to just mess around, and that's the video that I have. You go out of the app and come back into it, and sometimes it's buggy and overlays your actual hand tracking images on top of the Alex hands. That was really buggy. Now, people are going to be asking about resolution and frame rate and compression artifacts, and yeah, they're all there. That like
And
it's
tracking
there's
quality.
problems with. Sorry, go ahead. What?
And tracking quality. I think that's what people want to know. How well does the hand tracking work compared to
Okay,
using
so
real
this is
controllers?
yeah, that's the problem here, right? Like, it was there was a mismatch, right? So, like, can we show the video here? Because yeah, I would love to show the video that I shot. This is straight off of my headset. What you'll see here is, have I already gotten to this point? Here's me testing the hand tracking. I have dropped the Joy-Con controllers from my hands. They're hanging from wrist straps. So I'm doing things with Half-Life Alyx that you could only do with maybe a Quest 3 in some hacked location or the Index controllers. Look to my left here, and there's a mirror in my room. And the headset uses people detection to show me through the mirror. You see me doing hand tracking, then you see me grab the controllers and put them into my hands. And now I'm using the thumbsticks. So when you're asking about hand tracking quality or tracking quality, now that I'm holding the controllers, it's obscuring the quality of my hand tracking. This is poor lighting. This is just the lighting in my living room. It's the same lighting I'm using for the Quest 3 now, but I'm not holding objects in my hand that this is trying to track around, which is something that the Quest ecosystem does. But here I'm shooting a gun where I'm using it's tracking my hand as truth, and then I've got a Joy-Con inside of it to do the trigger pull. It's like my fingers are moving around in position as I'm doing this. It's not ideal. And then you get to this bug that happened from time to time where you go out of the app and then come back into it. Now my hands are shown overlaid on top of the Alex hands. It's pretty jarring. The problem is, uh, people went and played Half-Life Alex and complained about not having arms. Effectively, this system gave me arms, even though it was really crummy to have like joy. So I talked about it in my article. If you've ever seen Blade Runner 2049, there's a scene where an avatar inhabits a physical person and their fingers move out of sync with one another. That's essentially what happens when you're doing this and you've got your actual finger tracking overlaid on top of the Alex hands. It's pretty weird. But what that ends up having is like, I actually get my arms as ground truth. This is actually really good hand tracking right at the core. And then I see everything else in the world happen laggy, waving around behind the tracking that's happening for my actual headset and actual hands. Well, wait, that's actually a big change to the whole like architecture of this experience. I could have maybe handle more latency and uh, more compression artifacts if I'm grounded by big hands in front of my hand all the time doing things and blocking out all that waviness. This is getting me to full circle to talking about the world architecture. If we go back a few minutes, a few years here, David, do you remember the headset that supposedly got canceled from Apple and how it was supposed to function? There was rumor of a headset that used your computer and then beamed wirelessly to the headset, right?
Yes, it wasn't a computer. It was a console-like box that would have a Mac-like chip in it.
Yeah. All right. So that's where we go. So what we ended up having is a much bulkier, heavier device that runs M2 class hardware and is in line with an M2 like device. You can run a lot of the apps from Mac. You can run a lot of the apps from iOS. But it's bulky and heavy as hell. It's this really nasty thing. What I experienced here and what this taught me was like there's a huge amount of value in having Half-Life Alyx run on a box in the other room, separate to my headset. What that allowed me to do was just, oh, I want to go check my messages. I'm gonna go look at this in the apps. Oh, let's re-enter Alex. Boom, I'm back in Half-Life Alyx. There's no waiting, there was no load up time. Boom, I'm just back inside of it. And I'm back inside of it from this place of my hands being represented in the foreground of everything else. So all the people out there that want the latency and the tracking and all that stuff, it's complicated because it's all in the background behind this grounding experience.
Sure, and I have to agree with you. The ability to see your real arms in VR and Vision Pro is incredible, and I like the fact that it's likely that we will see games that are designed for Vision Pro, VR games that are designed for Vision Pro, use this so that they don't even render a virtual set of hands and arms. You would just show this segmented one. And the reason that this works and looks so much better is that this isn't 3D tracking. This is a 2D segmentation of your hands and arms. And you can kind of add in, controllers onto that or held objects. But, the idea that you need to run on a separate box to jump back in, VR games I've tried on Vision Pro let you jump back in immediately after coming into the shared space. I think you get a lot more performance this way, but it changes the entire
So
price and structure of the system to make it a lot less portable.
Well, so something else I did, James, can I share your involvement in my story here? Give me a comment there if I'm free to talk about what I did immediately after I got this up and running with James here. But let's give my fill out the bingo card on Walkabout Mini Golf. I went into Walkabout after this. I went into Beat Saber. The example in Beat Saber, and this will answer the tracking question. So I went into Beat Saber. I played a song on hard, holding the Joy Cons, doing the lightsaber thing. Uh, did a song on hard, beat it pretty easily, went up to expert and could not complete it, lost it after a minute. That gives you, and that's a song I know really well. That gives you a sense of the tracking quality. Somewhere between hard and expert level is where it cuts off on quality. So, James, I'm talking to James about this situation here, and he's like, "I'm not gonna get Joy-Cons." He's got a Vision Pro. He's like, "I'm not gonna get Joy-Cons for this. This is you're absurd." I'm like, I could actually show you what it looks like." And I put on the headset and call him on FaceTime and share my view from FaceTime, and boom, he is there watching out my eyeballs as I'm like, "Okay, here's the problems. All the questions you guys are asking, he's asking me the very same ones." And I'm like, "Well, like, look, it's this. There's this mismatch. There's this kind of quality. But here I am. I'm going through everything. Here's me reading a paper. Here's me going down the street. You can see what the problems are." And James is sitting there going, he's like hating me for convincing him that he needs to spend money on Joy Cons for his $3,500. I I'm hating the fact that I'm convincing him, that it's actually a usable thing. This is gonna make no
Usable.
one happy.
But you yourself admit that it's usable for demos like this and for showing it
Yes.
off. But you said very clearly to me that as soon as you get into combat, you can't actually engage in meaningful combat in this game because the tracking
Yes.
quality just isn't good enough for you to actually meaningfully engage with the
Yes.
enemy attacks.
I would not go to that. Yeah, I could not do that part of the game. I could not
You
play
can't.
that part of the game. No.
That's a big
Done.
commitment to say that part of the game. It is
Yes.
a game where you fight enemies
Sure.
throughout.
Right, right, yeah, it ended at the moment of the gravity gloves. Here's my question, like, so I went into Shiny's, DMs to ask the person who ported this, where does this go from here? Where is this the end? Is this as good as it's gonna get? And, like, they can't tell me. They don't know the answer to that question. Apple isn't gonna give me the answer to that question. They're gonna be a silent, quiet partner of this. They're not gonna give anything away at this highly critical moment. The fact that this worked at all was astounding to me, and you're absolutely right that yeah, there's a hard limit to what you're going to get out of this at present. My ultimate question, the reason I'm asking about this device in the other room that runs a world for you is I feel like it gets to some very, very interesting questions about the architecture of the next generation of personal computing. Um, I you're going and buying Apple Vision Pros in multiple storage sizes. You're going and buying Quests in multiple storage sizes. There is value in having a box in your house that has 3 terabytes of storage and has an M2 class chip or runs an XR2 Gen 2 and builds that world for you. And it goes to this idea that like you're right, David, like you could have a paradigm where someone can okay, inside this world, uh I got scared, more scared by a text message coming down. The little green dot came down from the top of the screen at me to show me I got a text message. And it scared me because I'm in an intense area of the northern star level of Half-Life Alyx when boom, all of a sudden a text message comes down just like a head crab at me. This is like all of your computer all at once. And there's all these things that the walkabout example is the one that gets me, right? Or you talked about Rec Room or VR chat, all these spaces where you let them run the server out far and away from you. You're letting them control your space. And there is a hard path that we reported out on this show. We had the Pluto Sphere co-founder on the show talking about how they timed it wrong, getting their system up and running. Apple is the one company of all of these that could conceivably put something like a Mac Studio in your home, and that thing becomes the storage container for a ton of your media,
Apple would
and
never do
including
that.
I know. Well, you say that, but did they ship they ship time machines? They shipped Wi-Fi,
Like
base stations.
2 decades ago.
Yeah, you're right. And why did they didn't need to do it for 2 decades, right?
Well, they were a different
This is
company then.
yeah,
They were
right.
even called differently. They were Apple Computer. Now they were as soon as the iPhone released, or as soon, I think within like a year or two, wasn't it? They changed their name to Apple, and that sounds really insignificant, but it does show this massive change in focus from the Mac being the center of your digital life to the iPhone and the iPad and the Apple Watch and the AirPods being these things that you can own without ever touching a Mac and never requiring it.
So, all I'm saying is I feel like let's see how I frame this. I feel like I think there's people who are gonna feel jealousy at for me doing this at the same time that they know that this is, like, absurd, that no one is gonna do this. No one is gonna buy this or do this. And yes, I'm a dreamer and imagining things that Apple might never do. There's there's reasons why, like, I I gotta disagree. Like, I'm thinking about Nintendo and how Nintendo plays in this space as well, but, like, there's one of the other reports this week we'll get into near the end. We got to talk about the Apple Pencil, but we have yet to see the beginning of how Apple aligns the rest of their product offerings with this new like product line. How do you get the Apple Watch, the iPhone, the iPad, HomeKit, all of their other technologies up and running online with this device? Here's a great segue to our next subject, right?
Yeah, I think, as I've argued before, I think they want your apps in Vision Pro, not your other devices. The point of Vision Pro is, I think, to replace the iPad. I don't think they ever want to have to for you to have to use an iPad with this thing, because the whole point of it running all of these iPad apps, and as we'll talk about soon, the stylus, could be that this can eventually supplant it. And this idea is, they shipped Mac Virtual Display, right? Why don't they let you see your iPhone? Obviously, you can just look down it and pass through, but why do they not magnify your iPhone up onto a giant screen? That's something they could do with AirPlay. There's no technical reason they couldn't have done that. I think it's very, very intentional. This idea that you have your apps running on Vision Pro using the native features of the OS, not just being mirrored across from legacy devices and that is the most Apple way to do this, to not give people the thing they think they want, which is their phone in a headset, but give them what they really want in the long term, which is their apps.
Yeah, so talk about my apps. My first apps, my first pieces of software that I used were Tetris and Mario Brothers. Super Mario Brothers 3 was the first game I think I can remember beating. And in addition to downloading ALVR on test flight, I downloaded an emulator on test flight this weekend. And I took a cartridge for the Game Boy Advance of the original of the what is it? Super Mario Advance 4, Super Mario Advance 3, or Super Mario Brothers 3. So this cartridge, I put it into a little reader, made a copy of a backup of what was on that cartridge, and then I put it on iCloud and I played it inside the Apple Vision Pro. And I played it with the same Joy-Cons that I went inside of Half-Life Alyx with. So here's a game from my childhood, one of the very first software programs I ever played, very first games I played to completion. I'm enjoying it in virtual reality, and I made a copy myself of the ROM file that I played in VR. And then I dropped that and I went into Half-Life Alyx with the same controllers. Argue with me all you want, but this is the future.
Yeah, no, I agree with you that playing traditional flat games in headsets is a huge part of the future. The ability to have it completely portably, have a giant television size screen, or even bigger, a cinema size screen that you can play all of your traditional games on. It's a huge, huge component of the future. But I mean, what I would wrap this up by saying is, while ALVR's port here is very technically impressive, while what Max Thomas has done here is truly remarkable from an effort and technical perspective, this is not a practical way to play the vast majority of PC VR games. This does not make the Vision Pro a PCVR headset, with the exception of games that use non-tracked input, like racing wheels and flight simulators. If you are someone who has the money and you do have the desire, the Vision Pro is potentially a great racing and flight sim. And but there is a massive caveat to that: you can't utilize anywhere near its resolution because there is no dynamic foveated rendering, eye tracked foveated rendering in ALVR. And that's not because Thomas hasn't got around to doing it. That's not because he can't. And it's not because he doesn't want to. That's because Apple does not give developers access to eye tracking. They, until the day that Apple changes visionOS to let developers use eye tracking, which seems unlikely given that they have clearly very carefully architected the entire input system around making sure that developers cannot do that. Not just the input system, but the whole way that rendering works through the shared space, through making even game engines like Unity essentially just forward their materials and shaders to Apple's own Reality Kit engine, which does the real rendering. That entire architecture of the operating system and input is to keep developers away from eye tracking. There's many other reasons for it, but one of the reasons for it is to do that. So we are going to see within the next few years headsets with eye tracking that have near 4K OLED micro displays that you can use on PC with foveated rendering. While from a performance perspective, you're not gonna be able to take anywhere near advantage of these displays. But that said, the OLED part is still magnificent, right? You're still gonna, I said this before, even with the persistence issue. I see there's a commenter here that keeps repeatedly pointing out the persistence issue. And the result of that, let's not spend too much time talking about the technical aspect, but the result of that is you will see motion blur when you move your head in Vision Pro that you don't see in a Quest. It's a real downside of the headset that we did point out in our review. For active gaming, it's one of the other reasons that this isn't practical. You're not seeing this smooth, sharp image of Half-Life Alyx as you turn around your head. You're seeing a motion blur. With that caveat in mind, I still think my limited testing with Vision Pro in Elite Dangerous made it the best Elite Dangerous headset because you have OLED in a high resolution form factor, high resolution display. Sorry.
Yeah, and so we're going to transition to visionOS 2 here in a minute to discuss what the next features in the Apple ecosystem might be. And I think what we're discussing here is going to play out a little bit in that update. I think what I hate guessing here, but w- when I tested ALVR and the quality of that experience, it's hard not to imagine that someone at Apple cares. That someone at Apple planned for this to happen when the time was right. Now, I could be imagining it, but, like, they had to do other things first. Your point about persistence, like, they picked that display type for a very specific reason for the use cases that they wanted to achieve, but that doesn't mean they can't try to improve certain aspects of the display's presentation with certain types of content over the span of time. They won't fix it, but they could improve it, and I think we could see
Well,
little improvements over time to a
to
lot of their
improve it, they would
software.
have to, I mean, this is a hardware issue. To improve it, they would have to reduce the amount of time for each frame that the display is illuminated. And the result there is that the brightness would lower. So to really change
Mm.
this in a meaningful way, they would have to really tank the brightness. And then you don't get, a lot of the advantages of how amazing this display looks. I mean, this is a headset that's designed for sitting down and watching media. As I said in my review, this is a heavy portable cinema and TV with a promising spatial OS. I'm sure the future versions of the headset will definitely address that, but I don't think there's anyone at Apple that's sitting there thinking this headset was designed for playing Half-Life Alyx. And the key thing that's missing is the controllers, right? They very intentionally did not include tracked controllers. They don't want to support tracked controllers. They insulted tracked controllers. They called them at the presentation of Vision Pro clumsy hardware controllers. They specifically pointed to the fact that we have built an input system so good that you don't need clumsy hardware controllers. I think Apple would look at a touch controller and think, yuck.
I mean, that's I think that speaks to a little bit of your your own perspective on things, right? But like, I want to talk about James' comment here and Andrews. These are both very long time viewers of us, and I think they can see the gap between our various perspectives here and understand like the what's missing. So Andrew, Ian and David are both right. We want our apps and we want a persistent place in VR. We want our apps from our phone and our iPad in the state they are on the phone and iPad. We want persistence of interaction. And then James's comment later here, agree with David, things need to improve, but the Joy-Cons convinced me it can happen in the future. Likely needs Apple to do some heavy lifting, at least with hand tracking improvements. And I think there was another one here, but those are comments that indicate how this is like the overall direction we're heading here. And I want to go back before we move on to the Vision OS 2. I want to bring along this concept. Like, thank you for the explanation about the persistence display and how that would decrease brightness. What I want to go back is that model of world of VR building, right? You and your head movements should be ground truth for all of your comfort. Your hand movements should be ground truth for your comfort. For comfort. The headset should show you as close as it can every head movement you make and every hand movement you make with the lowest latency humanly possible, because that is the thing that will make you feel like you're present in the other space as good as it possibly can. But you don't necessarily need to have the world running at the same level of latency as the latency of your head movements and your hand movements. You could have a little bit more leeway in the presentation of the world. Then you have to think about the online interactions and all the objects that you might throw. So let's say you pick up an object and you throw it over there. If there's 5 other people in the world with you, how quickly do they see that object? What I'm getting at here is you've got architects at all the major companies, Qualcomm. You've got people at Qualcomm calling people at Meta to try to figure out how they're going to architect this for games like Asgard's Wrath 1 to run from the cloud all the way to your device. If they ever want to do PC quality multiplayer games on mobile headsets with lots of moving pieces, they're going to have to figure out this pipeline. How exactly do you make sure that user comfort is absolutely maximized, as well as giving them access to the most number of worlds at any given moment? And I come back to this other idea that we've talked about a lot on this show, David. If you and I want to go to a world together that is extremely detailed, let's say it's red matter 2 quality of a world, and we want to go into it together. You and I each need to download about, let's say it's 10 gigabytes of data. What is the flow for getting David and I into that world together? Let's imagine it's an 8K cut of Dune, right? We want to see the highest resolution version of Dune at the same time synced up together. What file is that size? Is that a 20 gigabyte file to get that resolution at IMAX size? And all I care about is you and I want to sit there on the opening home night, and when when they make a joke or they do when it gets near the end of the movie and you see a funny thing, I want you and I to laugh at the same moment because it is synced up that well. How do you get the 30 gigabytes to both of our devices so that we can hit play at the same so that we can both laugh at the same time?
The answer for the vast majority of people is you stream it. And I think the answer eventually in the very long term when it comes to high fidelity VR experiences is the same. Eventually, cloud streaming will be at the level where people have a good enough internet connection, and the technology behind this when it comes to compression algorithms, when it comes to the way that these devices are designed in terms of sending an actual depth buffer that you can reproject through, all of this will eventually culminate in being able to stream these high fidelity experiences, whether it be immersive media, whether it be traditional media, whether it be a full volumetric experience. We're not quite there yet, but we will get there eventually.
So you're right. You've got the answer. They will stream, and I think what I'm debating is what do you stream and from where? And I think the answer may be different company to company. Let's move on to Vision OS 2.
Yeah, just a few more comments I just want to bring up here if I can scroll through these just to find the ones I was looking for. Someone asked whether the brightness issue. Kevin Burke is asking: is the persistence issue specific to Apple's panel choice or fundamental to micro OLED displays? So it's fundamental to one type of micro OLED displays. The current ones that we have, this first generation of OLED micro displays, use white light and then a color filter, and that's not very efficient. And that's why, while they are remarkably bright, it's not enough to combat the lenses, right? The massive loss in light efficiency that you get through pancake lenses. So the result is you have to turn them on for more time per frame than you would ideally want to, which gives you this persistent smear, the motion blur. A lot of the companies that are developing OLED microdisplay technology, micro OLED technology, are working on true RGB panels where you, instead of white light going through a color filter, there are individual red, green, and blue subpixels that are directly emissive. And once that happens, that should solve the problem quite easily. So, as far as we're aware, that is what most of the companies are working on. I would say it's possible that will arrive in Vision Pro 2, but it might be something that, in the worst case scenario, doesn't come until Vision Pro 3. Somewhat optimistic we'll see that in Vision Pro 2, though. Let's see if there's another comment here that I was looking for.
Onakaze suggesting that you take Switch-like controllers with hand tracking and get fusion between them, and that is a good solution. And I think Onakaze is saying that they brought that up previously, and I think
Yeah,
that's where we're headed.
I don't think Apple gives developers the prediction like that, though. They would need to give them more raw data. A huge issue with this is there's another comment here from PH Wizard saying also the boundary, the 1.5 meter boundary means you can't play room scale. There's just so many ways in which this headset is just not designed to be used for VR room scale gaming, for VR gaming in general, of the traditional type that we're talking about. And sure, you get these clever hacks that are done by incredibly intelligent people that are really ingenious, right? These are truly ingenious solutions and workarounds, but that's what they are. They're workarounds. Once we get headsets that have similar resolution displays with eye tracking, they will be able to deliver an experience far beyond what Vision Pro can do, simply because developers have access to that eye tracking.
Yeah, I'm thinking back to your streaming comment, and you were right about that. But I'm thinking back to the example of opening night of Dune. Right, I went to a theater where they had the file downloaded to a drive to watch every bit of data streaming out of that device, and you've got film being shipped around to all the 70 millimeter theaters. Like, I'm asking for a similar option for the fidelity of my virtual
Yeah,
worlds to
I'm
that.
I mean, there's a similar thing in home viewing, right? If you get the Blu-ray version, the 4K Blu-ray, the bit rate will be much higher than what you get in streaming. Some people really care about that. I think there are some services now that let you download essentially the 4K Blu-ray, and sure, you could do that, but that's going to be. It's actually on the order of like 80 gigabytes for a movie of Dune's size. You're talking about an 80 gigabyte file that we have to each download. Maybe that's fine. We just have to have some forethought, right? You put on your headset and you click download, or maybe there's a companion app that lets you easily click download to headset. Like, okay, so maybe you're in the Apple TV app on your iPhone and you see this and you've just purchased it or rented it, and you see an option to click download to headset, and your headset over in the corner that you have docked or plugged in. We talk about many times in the show how amazing docks are. They are the future for headsets like this. I do think Vision Pro needs one. You should be able to have a dock for this, and it downloads it. That's what people who really care about maximum bit rate are going to care about. The vast, vast majority of people, they are fine with streaming services, right? They Disney Plus, their Max, whatever it's called now. They don't care about the maximum bit rate, and the quality difference is not
Uh,
enormous. It's there if you really care, but the mass majority of people, they're just going to stream it.
yeah, like it's there if you really care. Such a fascinating thing to think about, right? You could say that about 3D media in general. You could say that about VR in general, right? Like,
I
you don't
think
have to play a lot of
I don't
VR
think I
games
would.
in VR.
I think the difference between 2D and 3D movies is dramatically different than the bitrate difference between a streamed 4K movie. Like, I am someone who actually does care about this, right? I used to have and I still do have a large collection of 4K Blu-rays, right? Because I do care about this. But even I recognize the vast majority of people wouldn't even be able to tell the difference. But you absolutely can tell the difference between 2D and 3D, right? The difference in watching a 3D movie on Vision Pro is stunning. And all of those movies we're talking about, these 3D movies, they're often streamed at the, if you're using them through Disney Plus, for example, at streaming bitrate, right? You're not getting this in full resolution. It still looks great. A VR game, right? The difference between playing a game on a flat screen and being inside it in VR is incredibly dramatic. It is like to the point where I think we sometimes forget because we've been in this industry for so long. Take someone who's never tried VR before and get them to play a VR version of a game that they've already played. And they'll say, holy shit, what the hell? I didn't know this was possible. This is unbelievable. You will, if you, in comparison, take the average person and put an A/B test between streamed movies and downloaded 4K, streamed 4K and downloaded full bitrate 4K, and they will not even be able to tell the
Uh,
difference.
I get what you're saying, but then you triple the size of the screen and you change the aspect ratio so it's even wider, and you talk about what IMAX is delivering. And then if you're stretching over a small image in 3D over that size screen, it starts falling apart more than
Sure.
the average viewer.
But internet connections are getting faster. Compression algorithms are getting better.
Yeah,
We're
you say
we're
that to an American, and I get
we're
upset.
we're pretty close to the point where you can stream full quality. Like the reason that the streaming services don't give you that quality is a economic one more than anything. And where there is demand, it will eventually arrive. Right? Like we are not far off from a world where you can the internet connections of the people who are likely to have a $3,500 headset for sure are far are absolutely good enough for this.
Let me flip this around. Let's imagine you've got a crew of 4 people, best friends that you like to go take into Helldivers and go on missions together in Helldivers. You've got this group. And Helldivers is updating its app every week. Would you prefer a service? Would you like a service that gave you a check mark once your crew is all updated and ready to go with the latest update? Would that help you get off in a party when you know that your teammates are all ready to go?
If these are people that you already know, you would just be on a Discord call or a FaceTime call or whatever, and you would just tell each other.
Yeah. How many gaming sessions have died because the app hasn't been updated at the very last second? You're right, but I'm
Fewer and
asking
fewer
for a
every year with
service that
faster and
takes care
faster
of it.
internet connections. I mean, these are
Yeah.
the advantages of streaming, though. You're absolutely right. Like, this is what Microsoft would say about Xbox Cloud streaming. This is what Google pitched with Stadia. This is what, more and more companies are trying to do. NVIDIA with the GeForce Now. That's the advantage of streaming, and people can still choose to do that. If a game's
Do do
cross-platform,
do you have a choice of which internet provider provides you internet at your home?
yes, but I mean, they're all the
Okay.
same wire. They're not like a different. They're a different person. Essentially, they're a different billing company, but they're all the same cable.
Yeah, we just don't have a lot of motivation to improve the cables here in the United States, so we're gonna have to get into that on a different subject. Let's get into this visionOS 2 thing because we are over our 2-hour mark, and people don't like us talking about visionOS this much. They want us to talk about the affordable headsets, which makes sense.
Yeah. So Vision OS 2 is coming this year, according to Bloomberg's Mark Gurman. We've talked a lot about Gurman's reports on this show in the past. He has been very accurate, reported a lot of the details of Vision Pro before it was even announced by Apple. This isn't a hugely surprising piece of news in itself, right? Vision OS, we expected to see a 2.0 because Apple shows new major versions of its operating systems every year at WWDC. There was maybe a question about, is it too early because Vision OS 1 is just out? Maybe they're not going to show Vision OS 2. But, Gurman seems to be suggesting it. He hasn't specifically said that they will show at WWDC, but that seems pretty obvious to read between the lines. And then if the normal pattern goes, that is the pattern with iOS and with macOS, we should see Vision OS 2 actually release later in the year, somewhere around September, October. We don't know what Vision OS will actually contain, but if you read our article on this, we speculated about one major potential feature because it's the biggest and I think only major feature that was announced at WWDC as coming for the headset at launch that did not actually arrive and is still not actually arrived. And that feature as you may have seen in the image I put up a second ago or in our article, is spatial personas. So we've talked before on this show about personas, right? You've probably seen them, Apple's virtual avatars that are near photorealistic based on scanning your face with the front of the headset. But how you actually see those in Vision Pro today is not really any different than a webcam. You see a flat 2D rectangular view that has the person's face contained within it, just as if they were calling you from their iPhone or their Mac or their iPad, except with the nightmare fuel aspect that they are a uncanny valley virtual version of themselves. And so this is somewhat useful. Ian and I will disagree about how useful that is, but as I just said, there's not really anything fundamentally different there than a traditional call, right? You're still seeing someone in a disembodied 2D panel, just like you would when you're calling them on your PC and Zoom, right? But Apple knows this. And I know that Apple knows this because I watched their spatial personas presentation at WWDC. And that's the point of spatial personas, is to take personas from this 2D rectangular view into 3D with all of the advantages of shared context, shared space, shared coordinate space. And this will be available in three templates for developers to use. There will be side by side, which is ideal for watching 2D content or any kind of 2D app that you're interacting with, just like Ian was talking about watching movies together. There's surround, which is ideal for volumetric content. That could be playing a virtual board game, a tabletop game like Demio or a traditional tabletop game, or it could be viewing a CAD model. Say this is a group of people at an engineering company and they want to look at the latest jet engine they've just designed. You would be in surround. So you see the 3D version of everyone's persona in a circle. You all have a shared context, whether this be in AR or in fully immersive VR. You see everyone in the shared coordinate space. So you point to someone and everyone else sees you pointing to that person, just like Ian and I right now have a shared coordinate space. The complete opposite of a traditional webcam call. The third type is conversational, where they put you in a semi-sphere and they put the content out to the side. This is for when the conversation is the point and the content isn't. The example Apple gave for this scenario would be if it's just a music player in the background and you're just hanging out with someone. You're not doing something together, you're just talking. So you have side by side for 2D content, surround for 3D content, and conversational for talking. And you have, just like Ian and I have now, three-dimensional avatars that exist in a coordinate space, but they are obviously a lot more realistic than these goofy, cartoony avatars we have right now.
I'm liking the comments here. I do all these take place in the shared space? Is
It's up to developers. They can either give you the shared space where you have all of your you have all of your apps that you want running side by side, or they can put you in a full space where they keep you in there. That's up to developers. The interesting thing about this is that Apple has architected visionOS to make it really easy to share windows and volumes. This is the architecture of visionOS is remarkable, and I will fanboy about it. Right, I have my criticisms of Vision Pro as a headset, but visionOS as an operating system is so far beyond anything else that it's like I don't know how a company like Meta would ever catch up. The way in which you implement multiplayer in a traditional Meta like headset or a Pico headset is that you make your own app within a game engine and you do your own networking and synchronizing of states. Maybe use a library, but you're still kind of like building around having to constantly think about this way of synchronizing everything. With Vision OS, this is like a couple of lines of code, and the system handles the whole thing for you, including bringing in the avatars, placing them, the voice chat, the positioning. All of it is just handled by the system in a way that I've never seen any operating system do before. This is an OS that was designed for this feature. And really interestingly, not to toot our own horns, but before Vision Pro was even revealed, we speculated that this would happen based on a job listing where Apple was hiring people, experts in operating system architecture and app development structure and networking to build exactly this. I am more excited for spatial personas than any upcoming feature in any headset. This will be a step change in what people can do with other Vision Pro owners.
Yeah, so the only way I love David's explanation there. He's describing, like, that's why you go read 12,000 words of his review. Go search David Heaney review, Apple Vision Pro. He's got the full layout. And to speak to my need here, right? I needed to play with that operating system. I didn't need to play with the hardware. I don't care. Eyesight is stupid. I called it out in my hands-on that it looked awkward as hell. I talked about how these personas feel really incredibly uncomfortable after seconds in my first hands-on. So like these things aren't great. They're stepping stones to the future, and eyesight as a hardware thing is really off-putting, and I don't want that extra weight on the device. But yeah, this operating system is the reason I have been using all this stuff. And when you talk about socialization, those FaceTime calls are the only way that I've been able to really connect with anybody else. And it is kind of off-putting to your point. Like there's a lot more that opens up as soon as these things uh, get out there. I think what gets me is, David, just like the system and the way it's architected is already more permissive than what you can get out of the Quest ecosystem, right? So how much further could things get with a Vision OS 2 that supports this?
Yeah, you can already do screen sharing, and you can see that they've put in the foundations for this. But it's just going to be such a different scenario when that screen sharing brings, you and the person you're talking to side by side, and you'll be able to point to something. You could even imagine like whiteboard apps, where just like in Horizon Workrooms, you're there, and we'll talk a little bit about how that those whiteboard apps could get a lot better in the next year or so. But the ability here to do this in a way that doesn't require spinning up a whole game engine. This just works for traditional apps, right? Even if they've just made an app that just takes place within a window, right? They can implement this with like a couple of lines of code. All of this is built into the operating system. This isn't each app reinventing the wheel each time and doing everything differently and having to, put a bunch of developer hours into this. This is all just part of what can be done on Vision OS, right? Like with the surround thing, you don't even have to be a developer. If you just want to build a simple app that allows you to view models together, like in FaceTime right now, Ian points out you can send someone a 3D model and you can bring it into your own space, right? But when you get this spatial personas, you can pull in a 3D model together. All of that just works. And if you're in VR, it will be realistically lit by the virtual environment you're in, and you'll all be in the same virtual environment. Or if you're in AR, you'll see it realistically lit by your own environment. Again, none of that had a single line of developer implementation. It all just works. So, Ian, I think is a fanboy. Some people would say here for Apple. I don't actually agree with that. I do think Ian gives his honest views, and I've seen many times Ian say things against Apple and for Apple and against Meta and for Meta. I do genuinely think Ian gives his genuine view on things and isn't influenced in that sort of
If
way.
if if you want to get my fanboyism out, let's talk about Nintendo. Let's
Well,
get that
let's next
conversation
week. We're
started.
past
Yeah.
2 hours at this point.
Yeah, fine. We'll go to the 4-hour conversation if that one comes up. But yeah, no, I appreciate that, and we'll talk about this last one here. I think I think that you have to like I hear the fanboy criticism, and I take it to heart, and I think about it. Um, because what I want to push back against, the reason like I don't these companies are running our lives. I like I that sounds like so it sounds so fake. It doesn't sound true. But, like, every aspect of our lives is shaped by the decisions made by these handful of companies. Like, they make policy decisions that dramatically impact every bit of our lives, and that's true for Apple, Meta, Amazon, Google, all the way on down the line. And I don't that's power, and I want to speak truth to power. That's what we do as journalists, and it's what our function is. And so we try to speak our opinions here, which may or may not be truth, like that's not the fact-based part of our conversation. But we have to balance the fact that like these companies shape our lives in ways that we have to talk about. Otherwise, we're giving them free reign to do whatever they want.
For sure. So let's before we move on to the last topic, I want to respond to a comment here from Petrus, and they say, even if Apple Vision Pro becomes really great, it won't achieve Meta's level of success because of the unit cost. So why are we spending so much time on it? Well, I think In a way, you have a good point, but that's why we're actually talking about Vision OS. Because, yes, the current Apple Vision Pro is ridiculously expensive. We are not delusional. We know that $3,500 is an absurd price for the vast majority of people that puts it in the realm of might as well not exist. And it's not just that. For that price, it's a heavy, clunky product with an external battery and a bunch of compromises that we've talked about in our review. But the key is that this is only the very, very beginning for the Vision headset line. And the real product here, and Apple even kind of hints at this in the way that they talk about in their press releases, is Vision OS. Vision OS is the foundation for the future of this headset line, right? So there is going to be a non-Pro Vision eventually, right? And they're going to try and get down the price of the Vision Pro. These are completely speculative numbers, but we might see the next Vision Pro at $2,500, and then we might see a Vision Air at $1,500, and then down the line, those numbers go down to 2,000 and 1,000, and over time, eventually, sometime next decade, we even could see Apple do what it does today with iPads and start releasing products around the $500 mark. Maybe not, but even then, the amount of value that they might put into the $1,000 product means that it might deliver more value than what you get in a Meta headset at $500. And all that time, what's really mattering in the background is the operating system, the platform, the ecosystem of developers that they're building. Some people have called Vision Pro a developer kit. I don't agree with that characterization because it's clearly a consumer product, but it certainly does act like a developer kit in the long term. If you look at the long sense of where this is going, and no one expects the vast majority of people to buy the original Vision Pro, but what we're talking about here is Vision OS because it will eventually power the headset that you do buy 5 to 10 years down the line.
Yep, yep. And ultimately, the way that's going to play out for people who are buying these headsets is 1 to 3 or 4 years from now, you're going to notice more annoyances and frustrating things with one system than you might with the decisions made by a system that was architected from the outset. One of the big news stories we had a couple weeks ago was Andrew Bosworth and Google apparently disagreeing over the direction of Android going down the line. Well, maybe they don't do it now, but let's say 3 years from now they hard fork those systems. That's what we're talking about here, right? What happens to your meta library if a bunch of your Android apps, flat screen Android apps, just stop working on the meta headsets because they couldn't iron out things with Google 3 years back. That's the kind of thing that David is outlining here when it comes to the Vision OS. So it's not a big deal now. It's too expensive for everyone now to go and try and experience this. But down the line, 2 or 3 years from now, what benefits do you gain from something that's architected this way versus the way Google Meta architected it?
So yeah, let's just quickly cover that last piece of news. I'm going to have to go here soon, but I think it's kind of relevant to the side by side use case. And this is a report from Mac Rumors that is reporting that a new Apple Pencil with Vision Pro support is being tested by Apple. Now, they're very careful there to say that they're not claiming that this is actually going to be a product. The testing suggests that Apple hasn't decided yet whether to make it a product. We did actually see, though, a VR developer found a reference to a stylus in the Unity Vision OS integration back in February, I think it was. So there is decent evidence that Apple is strongly working on this, that is testing it. If this does become a product, then you can see some of the use cases of the iPad start getting replaced here, where potentially what happens is that Apple is able to use the pressure sensor on this pencil in combination with the headset's tracking to turn any surface into a giant canvas. So you go on a huge desk or even your kitchen table and you clear it out and you can just draw. Now, that's the 2D use case, as well as obviously turning any wall into a surface that you can use as a virtual whiteboard in the side by side spatial personas setup we just discussed. The bigger potential is 3D because we've just talked so much about hand tracking, its limitations, and it's great in some ways, but you don't want to do like serious professional 3D creativity work by like pinching your fingers like this, right? Ideally, you do want a precise pointer, just like you track controllers on Quest headset or some of those Sony headset controllers that look really, really precise. Could this pencil potentially have positional tracking? I doubt it, but that would be a big, big game changer for Vision Pro. It would allow some really precise 3D creativity as well as just a 2D creativity if it was just mirroring the iPad's use case.
Yeah, I wonder about battery life would be the big constraint there. You've got a pencil that can last a certain amount of time, and if you bring out a new one and it's got fixed off track and that takes a lot of power, you wouldn't like that would be a big drawback. But of course, Apple has its AirTag technology that is rolling out in a lot of devices, and that gives you somewhat low latency tracking, uh, but it also I think drains power when you activate that.
Not so that's radio frequency tracking, but it wouldn't get you to the precision level. You need to do something optical to get to the precision level we're talking about here. I mean, the bigger question is how the hell would it charge, right? Because you charge the normal pencil by either attaching it to the contactless pins on the iPad or by plugging it into a USB-C or Lightning port. I think the solution to both of these questions is probably a dock, right? If you're a creative that has this on your desk, you have a dock that you place the Vision Pro in, that the battery has a position in the dock, and then the stylus beside it. So, power comes into the dock, goes into the battery and into the pencil, and then it's all just ready to go. Just like you have the Quest 3 dock, just like you have the Quest Pro dock
You
that
can
comes with it.
you just put a little magnet right up here and just all right,
For
that was a
future
joke.
versions, yeah, but from what we've talked about in this show, it sounds like this thing is gonna be on the market for and, we've it's crazy to think, but we're not even 2 months into this being on the market, and from what we understand from the supply chain, this is gonna be in the market for 2 years. So, we're nowhere near the end of this life cycle. We don't expect a new Vision Pro in 2025 unless some serious magic in the supply chain happens to make that possible.
So let me throw out one or two final comments here before we close out the show. I I was at WWDC last year, and they just announced the dates for WWDC this year. So those are happening on I think June 10th to June 14th. Uh, and there will be announcements. That's when we'll get the next set of details about visionOS. I would imagine the biggest, like they might do things between now and then, but that should be the major information dump for everything Apple there in June. Um, the At WWDC last year, I found one of the executives at Apple, and I walked up to him and said, "Oh, you're the executive that was quoted as being a big PC gamer and playing simulation games at home. What headset do you use for that?" And he's like, "I probably shouldn't say. I shouldn't say." I'm like, "All right, let's move on with my day." Um, but you've got on the executive team investment in PCVR streaming, and to your point, and I pointed it out in our article, this is the second month of availability of this device. The first month of availability was February. The second month of availability is March. And if you go over to X or Twitter now, you will see a bunch of people going, "Well, that was a dud. That just left a plop and didn't do anything. That's completely forgettable. Apple's over, right?" Like, of course, like how many of those are bots to begin with making those commentaries? But number two, I think it's missing the fact that this is a slow burn build. But the reason the reason I was obsessed with this streaming solution and why I went back to that is I think Apple is going to be stronger over the course of the year into gaming than a lot of our audience realizes, and it could be like I don't know. I think there's a lot that they can open up still here, and I don't know. Apple Pencil is just one small part of that. But do you think we'll see like do you I wanna put you on the spot, David, and just do you think this headset will compete for PC VR gaming for any, like, decision makers out there? Do you think there's ever a situation where someone would ever need to consider this for PC VR gaming?
No, I think for existing owners, it's gonna be a nice, cool trick to try out. But no, this isn't a serious contender for PC VR. But I do agree with you that gaming is going to be bigger on this than some people realize. It's just it's not going to be the same type of gaming that you get on Quest, where you have tracked controllers and you're pushing a thumbstick to move around a world and grabbing things with a trigger. That's not the kind of gaming you're going to see here. It's going to be hand tracking based. It's going to be unashamedly hand tracking based. It's going to be Job Simulator. It's going to be Vacation Simulator. It's going to be Demio. It's going to be Rec Room with your hands in open air hand tracking on Vision Pro with gaming. It's also going to be a lot of more casual games, the kind of thing that you talked about before, where you're playing traditional flat screen games of the kind that are on iPad. In fact, many of them are just quick conversions from iPad games. That's going to be what gaming looks like on this. I mean, it's also going to be PC gaming on a flat screen, right? It's a giant portable monitor. You can think about setting up something like bringing along your Steam Deck and using it to play traditional games on a giant monitor as your Vision Pro. Your Steam Deck is just doing the compute. The Vision Pro is acting as a display. That's the kind of gaming that this wants. When it comes to the things that people are saying about, my tracking loss there. I think the headset's not liking how long it's been on for. Um, when it comes to the people talking about that, what they mean is hype. These are people that live in the world of hype. They don't live in real market dynamics, right? It doesn't matter to them how many people are sitting there comfortably using a product. If people aren't hyping it up on social media or playing the game of, TikTok attention and trying to talk about it and talking about even use cases that people don't really care about, that's what those people are talking about. So sure, you're not seeing the same hype because the product's out. People are just using it. They're just actually enjoying it. They're not, taking a video of themselves running down the street with it on.
Well, those people returned it. Those people returned the
Yeah.
headset, and everyone else that's using it now is quietly building their apps for the next phase of their business. I think we've covered our subjects here today in depth. We appreciate our audience getting into it with us. You guys know us who've been watching us for a long time. You understand that we're trying to get into the nuance of this. We might misspeak from time to time, and we've obviously got our own biases to overcome when we come in here to the studio. But to David's point, we aren't the outlets going out there and saying Half-Life Alex is great on Apple Vision Pro. It is not. It is a terrible experience overall. I want to make sure that is clear. I would rather have it on a Quest 3 or any other headset. However, it was amazing to have that in there, and that's the type of thing those balance takes that we want to get into over time. I want to also just thank David for your incredible work to raise up members of our community, calling them out to balance us out overall. We've got a lot of work to do in covering this. I think this is going to be the biggest year, that the most every year is the biggest year in the history of virtual reality, but this is going to be one of the most important years because all of the bricks are being laid for the next 10 years by every one of the major companies. So, thank you all on this journey. Share the link out with others, get them in here watching our comments afterwards. Go and interact with those people. They obviously interact with this bit of content a little bit different way than everyone who watches our live show does. So go in there if you can and answer their questions or talk to those people. And we'll see you next week. Thank you so much for tuning in.
Thanks so much, everyone. Can't wait to see you next week. And as Ian said, yeah, we give you our genuine, truly held beliefs and opinions and takes here. We're not making stuff up for hype or clicks or views. We genuinely are going to tell you what we think. And you'll not always agree with us. Sometimes you will. But yeah, we can't wait to join you on the journey of, as Ian said, one of the most important years for the history and future of computing. Thanks so much, everyone.
See you later.